Everyone lost their marbles, yelling that catching a mystical smackdown using only beefy muscles was totally against the rules of reality. Yet this person casually tanked their ultimate power move using nothing besides this naked limb. If truth be told, during this previous living stint, this person was a broken mastermind who totally changed fighting styles while sitting in some rolling chair, completely incapable of landing even one decent knuckle sandwich. Fast forward to now, the soul exists reincarnated inside some realm dominated by snooty wizards who view regular folks like myself as merely biodegradable floor decorations. The snobs attempted to squash this body flat using heavy air magic, scary beasts, plus sketchy hired goons. However, this bowl is merely served to annoy that inner beast which attempted taking some peaceful nap. Observe this narrative regarding how this student dunked on every posh noble plus snagged the championship crown within the Kanjur Sorcery Institute. Visualize the backdrop. The date shows 504 per the saintly almanac while this person stands before the mythical Kanjur Arcanist Academy. Calling it legendary is an understatement because this colossal campus resembles a giant war bunker for fancy rich kids rather than a simple classroom. So this boy remained at the grand entryway, absolutely floored by the immense scale. Despite being just a youngster, his features beamed with massive aspirations for all to witness since this represented the climax. Indeed, call me Louis Carroll, a 13-year-old lad experiencing major anxiety. Observing the mountain of fellow hopefuls made the realization hit that joining the top imperial school would be no easy feat. Suddenly a loud hollow pierced the internal monologue, mentioning the specific name. For a brief heartbeat the intense focus shattered as the buddy rotated to look back. Those parents, Julian and Liseller, came sprinting forward as if their souls were at stake. These two definitely defined supported despite being completely winded from the heavy jogging. The mother, Liseller, instantly activated maximum worry settings while fussing over the child. She started inspecting the identification papers and verifying the hair dye remained intact to prevent drawing unwanted attention. Mom seemed legit spooked, explaining that candidates have literally perished during these examinations previously. She fretted that if someone targeted the boy due to those unique hair and eye shades, the situation might turn sour. Julian stepped forward to pacify her, resting a hand upon her frame as the boy watched. He maintained that learning sorcery provided the only solution for the current predicament, whatever that entailed. The father mentioned that within the entire Northern Empire, this institution remains the sole location where low-born folks like them even possess a prayer at the testing. It was a scarce chance that could not be wasted. The facility simply looms above the cityscape, a monument of authority and clout usually kept for the upper crust. It was a gorgeous sight but truly emphasized the chasm between the boy and the high society he sought to join. The legends were known, as the Kanjur Arcanist Academy was birthed by the royals and counts as a top 10 entity. It is essentially the Ivy League of sorcery featuring far more murderous entrance trials. And this was only the first step. Pictures of the legendary masters teaching here had been seen, displaying some truly ridiculous mystic talents. That was the specific tier being chased, the absolute pinnacle of arcane brawling and wisdom. The school's background is mythical, celebrated for producing the mightiest grandmasters of the empire. A memory of her specific painting showing a flame-covered warrior battling a mob comes to mind. That was legendary. Within the past decade, the first time event occurred when several noble protectors actually graduated from these halls. It served as the ultimate zero hero tale and fueled the fire of this determination. Often the mind envisions it, the dark shape of her god, like mage, a sign of the peak strength waiting for those surviving the drills. Most former students become the icons of the following year and the boy had her join them. Farther positioned those spectacles with a cocky grin, clearly feeling smug about the boy's ceiling. He was certain this provided the perfect setting to finally trigger those dormant sorceress talents. Every bit of effort was pledged, announcing at that moment that achieving the highest rank remained the solitary goal. This was not solely concerning fame, though a much more profound purpose existed beneath that intense stare. A terrifyingly intense look appeared on my face, a grim promise to get stronger and snatch back the orphanage from the church's clutches. I was not messing around. I had a mission and 0% chill left in the tank. My mom looked genuinely startled by the sudden, serious attitude radiating from my being. She recognized I was carrying a weight much heavier than the typical teenage angst or homework anxieties of her 13-year-old. Julian tried to comfort her, insisting she was doing more than enough for all the children under her care and praising her as a reliable mother. But I could still see the worry flickering stubbornly behind her gaze. I offered my mom a gentle smile, assuring her I owed my very existence to her kindness. It was a touching scene, though she couldn't possibly know how literally true my statement was. Since fate had a different kind of plot twist in mind for me, then the memories flooded in, a flashback to my former life, lying in a hospital bed, completely dependent on a respirator. It turned out I had been a brilliant mind who dreamed of becoming the ultimate fighter, trapped inside a body that couldn't even breathe on its own. Despite my severe physical limitations, my passion for martial arts refused to die out. I spent countless days in that wheelchair, obsessively researching fighting theory on a computer until I was considered a top-level scholar in the field. My extensive research completely revolutionized the modern martial arts industry, effectively bringing the entire field back from irrelevance. I was an absolute legend in the academic world, despite being physically incapable of throwing a single effective punch. But ultimately, All that fame and glory were completely meaningless. I was just a terminally ill person with a failing body, regardless of how much theoretical knowledge I managed to cram into my brain. I recalled how my biological parents from that life eventually chose to abandon me entirely. They left simply because I had become too much of a financial burden on their resources. This definitely qualified as a top-tier tragic backstory. When I finally passed away, I felt nothing but a complete burden. The memory of their departure remains clear, and the emotional pain of being left behind surpassed the physical agony of my illness. I simply longed for a healthy body and a life that truly belonged to me. Right at the moment the heart monitor finally flatlined, my final, dying wish was remarkably simple. All I truly wanted was a healthy physical form and a family that genuinely loved me. It was essentially the most textbook example of an anicaps plot setup. Honestly, the fact still hits me pretty hard sometimes. And just like that, I found myself reborn in the town of Manhwa within the northern Kandrir Empire. The sun was shining brightly, and everything in the town looked incredibly peaceful, which was a significant improvement over the sterile hospital room where I had just died. Yahello was the one who discovered me as an infant. I clearly remember people cautioning her that my strange hair and eye color were signs of misfortune, but she completely ignored all those warnings, only seeing a child in need of shelter and care. Despite being only an infant, I was experiencing a major existential crisis. I couldn't figure out why I hadn't stayed dead. I felt totally bewildered by the situation, but honestly, at least I was no longer dependent on a life support machine, and that was the exact moment when everything truly changed for me. I remember Yahello holding me tightly, declaring to everyone that I was an innocent child and she couldn't possibly abandon me. She was officially the MVP of my new story for granting me this precious second chance at life. She looked down at me with a warmth so profound that it honestly shocked me. This was a loving family I had desperately wished for, and I was finally getting to experience it firsthand. She then proceeded to give me my new name. Beginning then, Yahello essentially launched a brand new existence. The bookworm era of my existence officially hit its limit. Simultaneously, the quest for me to transform into a sorcery legend launched. Skipping ahead, I enjoyed a wonderful existence surrounded by doting relatives while possessing a functional anatomy, feeling truly content until some chaos ruined the vibe. Unexpectedly, some pompous aristocrat shoved my mother while calling her trash, which perfectly fit the stereotypical villainous introduction I anticipated. Mom tumbled down. I lunged to support her, feeling ready to explode because harming my parent is a guaranteed way to lose some molars. Father looked stunned, yet the snob merely mocked us, giggling that a peasant expects to master magic. Honestly, he was begging for a fist sandwich. I glared with enough intensity to melt steel, my gaze tightening with total fury, as I prepared to start a brawl regardless of the test. The jerk continued his insults, acting like poverty was contagious, while his buddies snickered in the rear, which really cranked my annoyance to 11. I was visibly trembling from resentment, my hands balled up for a strike, while I muttered some choice words about their lineage, sensing a fight was imminent. However, Father caught my arm before I swung, realizing a pre-test scuffle meant an instant ban. Though my internal fuse was burning dangerously short, Pop suggested prioritizing my grading over those morons. The wise strategy, although I detected that suppressing his anger felt as painful for him as for me. Mother also interjected, mentioning my oath to avoid drama, fearing these pompous fools might ruin my shot at a successful career path. Inhaling deeply, I suppressed my urge to strike, despite still staring through that blue blood. I was tolerating it, but the jerk made my permanent naughty list. I said sorry to my parent, relaxing my face as Dad offered some silent support. We were a tight unit, needing unity to navigate this mess. The snob strutted away, calling us boring while claiming victory, unaware he just provoked someone possessing the spirit of a legendary martial arts mastermind. Abruptly, folks started scattering and yelling for space, signalizing a high-status arrival that shifted the entire vibe of the area. Master Kane appeared, triggering a massive stir since a renowned successor showed up, while the previous pompous blue blood seemed completely terrified by his aura. We Kane Ironker, the big shot successor, looking dashing and stylish as heck. I immediately recognized him as a formidable future competitor. I observed his stroll while keeping a low profile, understanding that titans like him were the obstacles I needed to overcome for true supremacy. Glancing at my folks, I flashed a positive hand signal, vowing to succeed and honor them, regardless of how many wealthy brats blocked my path. Moving forward, I caught Kane looking my way briefly. It appeared the elite prodigy already detected something unusual about a supposedly average youngster like me. I swore to master the mystic arts and display my true potential. Those rich guys were still chuckling, but their gibbles would soon turn into silence. Mere success wasn't the goal. I wanted to be the most powerful being alive. Shielding my loved ones requires total strength, and the choice altered my destiny. Absolute resolve flooded my system. I clutched my identification badge while my gaze likely shimmered with power, prepared to advance regardless of public opinion. Julian and Yahello stared with deep worry, cognizant that the survival rate was brutal, with barely a handful of winners among 20,000 hopefuls. Father whispered about my unmatched bulletedness, and he wasn't lying, because once I set my mind, I am unstoppable, leaving my kin to simply cheer me on. I bolted for the testing arena, making others look like they were standing still. I wasn't being passive. I was attacking this challenge directly. Stepping into the giant auditorium, I realized I was surrounded by veteran warriors, making my 13-year-old self look like a toddler in a lion's den. The immense scope of the trial hit home as legions of hopefuls packed the yard. The 504th Kandrir Arcanist Academy exam finally kicked off. The Academy boss, Argene Smith, emerged on the high ledge while looking every bit as intimidating as a legendary headmaster. I scanned the mob of hopefuls, noting a strange collection of magical brawlers and spellcasters gathered from every corner of the map. I recalled the 6 tiers of power ranging from noob to saint, with my own sights set on the Grandmaster peak. Reaching the 3rd highest rank meant gaining massive perks and clout. Though that mountain was way too steep for most people, the principal dropped some heavy truths about our grim reality, noting that only the most brutal fighters get to join the elite. He explained we had to hike up the stairs while being bullied by the older students, which sounded like a total scam. The smug upperclassmen were already in place and looking down at us like snacks, but they had no idea I was a predator. We had to conquer exactly 1,000 steps to pass, making this a literal uphill climb to avoid getting cut from the roster. Smith gave us a final heads up as the sand started falling, his face looking more serious than a heart attack. A massive roar signaled the start, and the huge crowd immediately started trampling each other to reach the first step. Applicants were already throwing elbows and bragging about how easy this was, clearly having no clue about the disaster incoming. The senior at the summit flashed a wicked grin, giving off some serious vibes about wanting to ruin everyone's day. He tossed out a sarcastic welcome. Suddenly, the massive wave of red energy exploded from his body, washing over the crowd like a tsunami of pure hatred. The crimson ore started swirling violently, creating enough pressure to turn the average applicant's spine into jelly. The students nearby were absolutely losing their minds, screaming in terror as the killing intent made the air feel like sludge. People were folding faster than cheap lawn chairs, collapsing onto the stone because their willpower was basically non-existent. The crowd recognized Lord Cheath, a rich kid and former top student who was currently flexing his ego to scare the commoners. Cheath smirked while claiming he wasn't even attacking us, just letting his scary vibes delete half of the competition. The other applicants were totally paralyzed, realizing the senior was on a level they couldn't even dream of reaching yet. I was the only one standing perfectly still amidst the chaos, watching everyone faint while giving Cheath a very bored expression. I started marching upward, my boots clacking against the stone as I ignored the red ore like it was a light breeze. While every other person was gasping for oxygen, I was basically just taking a relaxing stroll through the park. My eyes started glowing with a chilly blue light as I stared him down, giving him a look that asked if he was done yet. The senior looked legitimately shocked that a random kid survived his ore, especially since the ground was covered in losers. Cheath mentioned I had some guts but quickly went back to his noble rambling about how peasants don't belong in his school. He kept running his mouth like a broken record, convinced that I was just a fluke and would eventually start crying. I didn't say a single word back. I just kept my eyes locked on his energy signature to find a weakness. His eye started twitching because he couldn't break my spirit, so he decided to crank up his power even higher, screaming that he would make me crawl. Cheath fired a massive pillar of red light that felt like a total case of overcompensation. The crushing force actually turned those poor kids into human pancakes right on the steps, proving they were merely toddlers playing dress. But compared to a genuine warrior, my luscious locks danced wildly while I stayed rooted like a stubborn oak in a hurricane, making Cheath wet his pants as he realized I was totally bored. I chimed in with a snarky grin, asking if his spooky vibes were just for show, since they might scare babies but felt like a gentle tickle to me. A flashback hit me of my younger self standing over corpses in a gloomy woods, reminding me that Cheath's magic shows were just pathetic glitter compared to real war. I blasted forward with a neon glow surrounding my frame, deciding that playing hard to get was over and it was finally time to ruin his afternoon. My eyeball ignited like a blue stove burner while I zoomed past everyone's vision, leaving the crowd rubbing their eyes in disbelief at the sheer absurdity of my speed. That older student scrambled to glow red like a nervous tomato as he braced for impact, finally realizing he messed up. Oh, his realization came way too late. Flashing a devious grin, I informed him that I possessed decades of combat trauma packed into this tiny teenager, and I was ready to share the pain. I vaulted upward with enough power to turn the pavement into gravel, soaring toward the top landing like a caffeinated missile with a very specific crutch to settle. My fist pierced his ruby-colored shield like a hot knife through butter, demonstrating that my stubbornness was far more potent than his sparkly little magical barriers ever were. I coiled my frame like a spring before unleashing a legendary haymaker, using master-level physics to ensure the sit would be remembered by his ancestors for generations. I warned him that he was about to learn the definition of terror, letting my energy erupt while my eye beamed like a lighthouse of impending doom. The collision was nuts, triggering a strobe light effect of sapphire and ivory that probably rattled the teeth of everyone standing within a 3-mile radius of us. The crowd stood there catching flies with their open mouths, witnessing a puberty-stricken middle schooler absolutely wreck a supposedly elite upperclassman without even breaking a single sweat. The smug expression folded faster than a lawn chair as my knuckles met his chin, replacing his ego with a very vivid and painful lesson in humility. My hand kissed his mandible with such grace that the air itself vibrated, providing a cinematic moment of pure joy for anyone sick of his royal brat routine. He sailed through the clouds while I struck a pose like a total legend, leaving the onlookers mumbling about how a literal child just turned a senior into a projectile. I touched down with style, resetting my face to its default resting murder mode because I was already bored of this loser and hungry for the next victim. That older brunette student watched me leave while trembling like a fallen leaf, finally grasping that this regular peasant was actually God, though destiny was currently sharpening its knives for him. Rumors spread like wildfire when people noticed I hadn't used a single spell, realizing I just crunched a wizard and labeling me a terrifying freak of nature. I strolled away without checking the damage behind me, keeping my eyes locked on the summit because nothing was going to stop my inevitable climb to the top. I spotted the giant scoreboard where future legends are listed, knowing full well that my name was destined to sit right at the peak like a king. A random hand lunged for a card on the table, indicating that the drama was cranking up and another fist fight was likely scheduled for the very near future. That same brown-haired dude lost his marbles, shrieking like a banshee because he couldn't handle the fact that a lowly peasant was making him look like a chump. He swung a glowing crimson heavy hitter aimed at my spine, trying a cowardly sneak attack that looked about as safe as juggling chainsaws during an active earthquake. I felt his saltiness coming from a mile away and shifted into a guard, proving that my reflexes are tuned to a level usually reserved for divine beings. The thunderous crack echoed as I caught his scalded strike with just my arm, sending a blast through the area without needing a drop of Marner to help. The guy had a total meltdown, hollering about how I parried his ultimate move with pure brawn, unable to comprehend that my gym routine was clearly superior. Suddenly, Principal Smith appeared and touched the boy's shoulder, radiating a vibe so spooky and dominant that the entire brawl just evaporated into thin air instantly. Smith explained that their fancy school treats everyone the same regardless of their bloodline, reminding them that monsters don't care about your family tree when they eat you. That older student finally caved, lowering his head while I offered some polite thanks to the boss, as both showed great class, proving why Smith is the one running this show. The headmaster looked at me with a tiny grin and gave his congratulations. Taj, Louis Carroll. I cleared the opening round in a legendary fashion, though the party was just starting. After the initial trial, Smith pulled me over, staring at my strange hair and eyes while whispering that my look was quite worrying, since he clearly sensed something weird about this peasant kid. I kept my face down, hidden in the shadows while I listened to the leader, knowing my features were a total giveaway, but I didn't expect the big guy to notice so fast. I looked up with a sharp, questioning stare, asking what he meant, not because I was scared, but because I was curious why the Academy's most powerful man was getting so personal. Much to my amazement, the principal gave me a kind pat on the head, acting like I was just some normal kid, which felt like a bizarre moment of affection in a place meant to. We cold, parted meat grinder. Smith turned serious again while leaning forward with a solution, saying if I got admitted, he would brew a magic potion to hide my traits. Though I questioned his agenda, I watched him leap, my thoughts already pivoting back to the contest, and while I had no idea what the boss was plotting, I had to pass first, so I checked my pulse for the next test. The headmaster strolled toward the central offices, abandoning me in the middle of the giant courtyard, and while the first trial ended, the air was already getting heavy with drama. Lord Sheath, the brown-haired noble I clobbered earlier, was glaring at me from across the yard, looking totally shocked because nobody had ever seen the headmaster get involved in an exam like that. Sheath was absolutely livid, his face twisting with fury as he watched, wondering why Smith would protect a filthy commoner like me, as his ego was crushed after that public shaming. The location changed to the second training zone, a massive bowl that looked like a high-stakes gladiator pit, where a voice over the speaker system announced that only 1,000 survivors remained after the first round, mostly high-born kids with elite training since birth, leaving zero room for peasants. But my luck was about to get even worse. Sheath and his little group didn't wait, coming straight for me again to hunt for a rematch, having not learned a thing while looking ready to cause trouble before the test even started. Sheath got close with an evil smile, muttering that nobody would save me this time, as he was sure I only made it through the first part because of a lucky save by the boss, who shouted, calling me a gross peasant and totally losing his composure, trying to act tough in front of the crowd, but he was really just making a huge scene. I didn't even blink, just staring back with a bored look like I'd heard it a million times, having survived much worse things in my past life than a brat's tantrum. Sheath's crony supported him, cackling while pretending to be major players, and one minion sneered that without the headmaster's help, I would have been booted out hours ago. I finally broke my silence with a taunting grin, calmly mentioning that honestly, Sheath was a total moron, and by calling a noble an idiot in public, I was being an absolute savage. That insult hit Sheath like a physical slap, leaving him totally stunned, as he never expected the trash he was bowling to torque back with so much audacity and power. I added that the old master has way better taste than them, my eyes flashing with a scary light, basically telling them they were too dumb to understand the principal's interest. Sheath cracked, squeezing his hand as red energy exploded around him, and he screamed, asking if I wanted to get wrecked right now. Ignoring every single rule in his mindless, I merely offered a cold, bored smirk, basically begging the fellow to try something. knowing full well I could finish this whole fight with just one quick move. Chief's eye was practically popping out from rage as he got ready to swing. Having lost all composure, which in this academy is the first step toward a very painful loss. Screaming that he'll do it, Chief threw a powerful punch covered in destructive energy, wanting a one-shot kill, but his move was way too predictable, and when his world flipped, my eyes narrowed, my focus becoming intense as I tracked his fist, having seen millions of strikes like this in my research, so to a real fighter, they look like an amateur. Chief's hand whistled through the air, aimed right for my face, and he put his whole soul into this strike, but he was about to learn what happens against a technical master. I didn't move away. I struck back, and using only 2 fingers, I hit a vital spot, making the entire power of his punch vanish in a single instant. Chief locked up, his eyes bulging with terror when he realized his muscles wouldn't move, panicking as he stayed completely frozen, paralyzed by my flawless and precise counter. I gave him the final touch, my fingers shining with focus power, using a meridian severance spiral point strike, which was just pure martial arts that ruins his energy flow. The force arrived silently yet was utterly ruinous, unleashing a colossal seismic jolt the moment our fists met. Chief suddenly found himself enveloped in the explosion, simultaneously absorbing a nasty blow to his delicate ego and his very expensive anatomy. Chief went airborne, twirling uncontrollably across the stadium like a forgotten Barbie doll tossed by a toddler. He was currently receiving a painful, highly visible lecture on the subject of modesty, delivered straight through his ribs. This pair of incompetent psychics shrieked in disbelief as they witnessed their fearless commander become an impromptu projectile across the examination hall. They yelled desperately for their wounded pal. Their previously smug grins having evaporated quicker than cheap cologne. The unfortunate noble slid across the gritty stone floor entirely on his spine, etching a distinct chorky groove in the process. It was quite a mortifying spectacle for a spoiled jerk who, moments prior, had been confidently boasting about his supposed physical prowess. The 2 companions sprinted over to haul their leader upright, their features bleached white with sheer terror. They were rapidly concluding that the peasant boy they decided to harass was perhaps less of a victim and more of a terrifying, highly skilled nightmare. Chief emitted a dramatic, suffering howl, clutching his damaged appendage while attempting to regain his footing. He was swimming in a sea of misery, and his physical system seemed to be staging a slow, agonizing protest against his instructions. He gazed down at his violently shaking fist, this complexion resembling old paper. He managed to stammer that his limb was useless, observing an unsettling violet shimmer hovering precisely where my attack had landed. He craned his neck to glare at me, his face lit with panic and discomfort. We shrieked accusations of venom usage, utterly refusing the notion that he was bested by genuine talent, but destiny apparently prefers punchlines to petty nobility. I stood looming over the injured brat, regarding him with the warmth of a glacier. I clarified that my method involved 0 toxins and 100% disciplined fighting techniques. Perhaps he should have dedicated his schedule to drilling instead of constantly running his mouth. I surveyed the utterly bewildered audience, my imposing aura dominating the entire stadium. I confessed that I had indeed attempted to dial back the power, just as Mother instructed, but my patience instantly vanishes when confronted by particularly dense human beings. My hand balled into a hard knot, and my concentration sharpened considerably. I announced the philosophical truth that permission to strike another is granted only to those willing to absorb a few return blows. That, right there, was the rhetorical equivalent of smashing the podium. Abruptly, an individual seized my arm from the rear, effectively halting my forward momentum immediately. The person's grasp felt completely secure and highly practiced, managing to startle even my well-honed senses. The interceptor was none other than Lord Cain Ranker, the Academy's foremost aristocratic genius, who decided to intervene in the brawl. He stated placidly that this was still an official testing environment, drilling his focused gaze directly into my own. Cain fixed me with an unwavering stare, his features completely blank and inscrutable. He inquired if losing my eligibility was a pleasant prospect. He certainly wasn't acting as Sheath's bodyguard, but rather issuing a serious caution against self-sabotaging my own opportunity. I glanced pointedly at my restricted appendage, thoroughly irritated by the sudden intrusion. I maintain a personal aversion to taking orders, particularly when they originate from yet another self-important, overbearing member of the aristocracy. Chief continued attempting to spring into action, but one of his pals was genuinely wrestling him to the ground. He was screaming for Cain to butt out of their affairs while the nobles stood strategically between us like a particularly refined piece of concrete architecture. Cain redirected his attention toward the pathetic aristocratic cohort, his bright azure eyes briefly igniting with regal command. He questioned whether they were aware of his exact identity. Speaking in a low, tremendously menacing undertone, Cain insisted emphatically that they were the individuals required to retreat immediately. Even the perpetually pompous Sheath became absolutely mute once the designated successor to the Ranker household opened his mouth. This man certainly possesses an intimidating personal gravitational field. The juvenile noble collective appeared thoroughly exasperated, yet they recognized that confronting Cain was a suicide mission. Chief started to formulate an angry reply, but his accomplice physically dragged him off, urgently advising him to postpone his tantrum. They eventually shuffled away, utterly vanquished and deeply ashamed of the whole incident. The pressure level momentarily dissipated within the venue. though I was certain that this particular group of losers would eventually make a highly unwelcome sequel appearance. Keith shot one final look over his shoulder, his expression twisted into a portrait of absolute loathing. He grumbled that both regular citizens and aristocrats were utterly worthless, demanding everyone to retain the memory of his downfall. This guy is definitely going to evolve into future trouble, and this embarrassing display is apparently his origin story. I observed Kane's retreat, my face instantly returning to its default setting of profound boredom. I assumed all blue bloods functioned identically, relying solely on inherited rank to justify their reckless behavior. I was definitely not applauding his sudden, unexpected moment of civic heroism. Kane moved toward the remaining competitors, and immediately one female student began shamelessly attempting to charm him. She inquired whether he possessed notable strength and bravery, but Kane simply strode onward, prioritizing the completion of the assessment. A sizable cluster of young women were already performing intense adoration, their faces flushing red and their voices hushed as he passed by. Kane was clearly designated as the ultimate shining star of this institution, and his official academic enrollment had not even begun. Potential students were practically engulfing Kane, pleading fervently for him to join their group for the upcoming evaluation. Representatives from the Node and Shi lineages, essentially everyone present, desired a favorable relationship with the Aranker successor. A pair of spectators in the throng were commenting on how Kane was merely 13 years old yet possessed such phenomenal ability. They felt absolutely certain that partnering with him was a foolproof express path straight to achieving a successful score on the placement examination. I simply released a dismissive puff of air, turning my head away in profound distaste. I held zero interest in engaging in frivolous popularity games or cultivating useless aristocratic alliances. My sole objective was demonstrating my unparalleled power entirely through my own merits. Unexpectedly, the colossal whirlpool of sapphire, colored kinetic energy spontaneously manifested upon the main platform. The sheer wattage radiating from the phenomenon was astounding, immediately snagging the focus of every single person, signaling the official start of the second challenge. Principal Smith materialized on the platform, presenting a demeanor that was both tranquil and thoroughly formidable. He proclaimed that the much anticipated assessment of raw strength was commencing, this delivery reverberating across the massive arena. Brightly luminous, buttercup, yellow geometric patterns materialized on the pavement directly underneath our shoes. Individuals began yelling in startled bewilderment, examining the ground as the powerful arcane enchantments initiated their function. Kane suddenly sported an unexpected, glowing earth tattoo on his chest, courtesy of a seriously potent detection spell that instantly wired everyone in the arena into one giant, magical social network, whether they liked it or not. Suddenly, the stage decided it was leg day, but for everyone, as gravity ramped up tenfold, sending most participants face first into the floor. Particular young lady dramatically declared her body had suddenly gained the weight of her small car, her knees giving out like a cheap lawn chair. The colossal, luminous enchantment, practically vibrating with untamed energy, bloomed across the whole floor, signaling some seriously elite earth magic was now in play. Plurally, this magical torture device was engineered to filter out anyone who wasn't built like a brick outhouse, both in body and mind. They had no idea the actual fun was just beginning. Principal Smith remained utterly unflustered, like a statue amidst the crackling electric atmosphere, casually informing us that our upcoming brawls would unfold right here, under the weighty influence of this earth magic. Essentially, he declared, this trial was less an exam and more a Darwinian obstacle course with extra protein powder. Even the notoriously pompous aristocrats, chief among them, were practically purple-faced and wobbling like newborn giraffes, battling desperately to avoid an unscheduled nap on the floor. They collectively moaned that this unbelievable grandmaster-level earth magic was simply rude, noting their supposedly elite training was barely sufficient to prevent full body collapse. Suddenly, a shout erupted from the stands, demanding everyone witness a certain someone just meandering about, completely unfazed. As everyone shifted their gaze, their expressions melted into utter disbelief, jaws practically hitting the floor at the sight. Payne, though still valiantly upright, was glistening like a glazed ham and straining under the spell's immense burden. I could practically hear his internal monologue screaming in disbelief that anyone might be outperforming him in this Herculean challenge. Kane mumbled under his breath, eyes bugging out as he peered toward the arena's heart, adorning horror on his face. He despotted my unmistakably shimmering silver hair, realizing with a sigh of dramatic defeat that I was, once again, effortlessly hogging the spotlight. My boots met the stone with a solid thud, their impact leaving a subtle crack in the ancient floor. Despite the beast of gravity, I zipped around with surprising swiftness and raw power, making it look far too easy. Indeed, it was I, hadn't casually sauntered onto the main stage already, while the rest of the hopefuls were still engaged in a rather undignified crawl. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of shrieks, utterly dumbfounded that anyone had managed such a feat so quickly. Principal Smith, sporting a rather mischievous grin, physically hoisted me up, declaring with a flourish, well, look who decided to be first once more. He quite clearly savored the spectacle of me effortlessly shattering everyone else's preconceived notions. The other examinees' faces collectively dropped as the realization dawned. I was the mysterious speedster who had aced the initial challenge with embarrassing ease. My burgeoning legend status in this academy trial was rapidly blossoming, sending the privileged nobles spiraling into a deep, dark abyss of competitive angst. I towered confidently amidst the shimmering magical etchings, my very presence seemingly thickening the atmosphere itself, as if the air was suddenly shy. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, a confused mix of reverence and apprehension, as they once again pondered, who is that guy? Pain, wheezing like an asthmatic dragon, internally lamented that even his 3 years of master-level training left him barely able to stand. A quick glance at me solidified his sinking suspicion. The skill difference between us was likely far grander than his ego had previously allowed. The principal's booming voice echoed across the arena, the stark pronouncement cutting through the heavy air. He declared, with finality, that only examinees currently defying gravity would participate in the next challenge, summarily eliminating about half the initial applicants from the running. Smith, with a dramatic flourish, snapped his finger, summoning a vortex of swirling, cerulean magical energy right before him. He was clearly gearing up to unveil the next phase of this delightful little exam. And I, for one, harbored no illusions about it being a cakewalk. What transpired next left even the skeptics utterly flabbergasted. Right beside me, the brilliant blue magic circle shimmered into existence. It honestly felt like the Academy, in a moment of pure favoritism, was found, delivering all the precise magical tools I needed to effortlessly crush this upcoming challenge. Then, as if summoned by an invisible, enchanted shopping spree, a shimmering rack laden with glowing weaponry, swords, axes, and staves, flickered into existence from nothingness. Smith casually gestured, informing the participants that a fine selection was available for those wishing to equip themselves, just in case they preferred not to face the next stage bare. Panted, the dazzling, gravity-defying swirl of spinning swords then ascended into the air, their polished blades shimmering as they danced above the stage. Though a truly beautiful magical spectacle, its ultimate purpose was undeniably, purely, and brutally combative. My hand instinctively shot out, plucking a rather unassuming wooden training sword from the array with uncanny precision. There was no dithering, no agonizing over choices, simply the natural reflex of a seasoned fighter selecting their implement and preparing for the inevitable fray. Standing there, brandishing a pair of swords, I proudly projected the image of her battle, hardened old-timer, utterly primed for conflict. Forget the opulent staves or cumbersome axes. All I truly required was a sharp edge, or two, for the impending slicing and dicing, while others strained, grunting and panting like they were moving mountains just to heft their chosen weapons under the crushing gravity. I, on the other hand, carried on looking like I was merely enjoying a leisurely morning stroll. Principal Smith surveyed the dwindling pool of applicants with a gaze as unyielding as granite, before flatly declaring that we were, in fact, prepared, and it was time to unleash the examination. In that very instant, the arena officially devolved into utter, magnificent pandemonium. Smith, with another sharp crack of his fingers and eyes burning with an almost unnerving energy, loudly proclaimed the immediate release of the bound slimes. Slimes. Seriously, my brain immediately concluded that this whole affair was rapidly descending into a suspiciously familiar, level RPG opening sequence. A creepy collection of dark holes suddenly gaped open in the arena's ceiling, staring down like a swarm of angry, ancient eyes. Something was definitely about to fall, and I had a distinct feeling it wasn't just a refreshing drizzle. The other examinees craned their necks skyward, clutching their weapons like security blankets. Utterly baffled, one brave soul even piped up, precisely what are bound slimes. Meanwhile, I simply kept my gaze glued to the ceiling, every fiber of my being screaming an urgent, primal warning. I roared a desperate warning, my heart, like eyes instantly snagging a sudden, ominous movement. Of course, I was the sole genius to deduce that the approaching danger wasn't coming from the sides, but rather, straight down from the ceiling. Then, hundreds of glowing, blue blobs began raining down from the ceiling like a slimy meteor shower. Someone belatedly shrieked, "Look, things are falling." But by that point, simply standing around contemplating physics was remarkably poor strategy. With a grotesque splat asterisk, a single slime scored a direct hit on an unfortunate examinee who had apparently paused for a quick philosophical debate. The iridescent blue goo instantly engulfed him, confirming my suspicion that these seemingly innocuous blobs were far more menacing than their goofy appearance suggested. One particularly inquisitive slime landed right before me, a rather adorable, undeniably squishy, cerulean blob adorned with surprisingly large, completely blank eyes. I mentally confirmed, these must be those infamous bound slimes, not for a single second allowing my battle-hardened defenses to waver. The gelatinous blobs were quickly turning the arena into a bouncy castle. The rules were surprisingly straightforward. Take a hit for 1 point, perform a snappy dodge for 2, and completely annihilate 1 for 5. This was a true point grind in a strange gravity field, but the unique choice I was about to make would utterly redefine my future. Principal Smith observed the carnage from his elevated viewpoint, wearing a perfectly chiseled expression of utter detachment. He sternly reminded us that exactly 100 students would move on to the third phase, meaning the stress levels were currently high enough to shatter titanium. Surveying the ensuing pandemonium, I let my gaze sharpen like a newly whetted blade. I quietly reflected that only a mere century of us would progress, understanding that flawless execution was the only way to lock down my qualification for the subsequent trial. A single, glistening slime emitted a gentle squeak as it rebounded from the ground, While it appeared as innocuous as a jelly dessert, in a high-ranking institution like this, underestimating any sticky puddle of goo means you're inviting a full-blown existential crisis. The pair of blue-blooded nobles leaned back, observing the jiggling creatures with utterly disdainful grins. One hotly declared the slimes looked intellectually challenged, and his friend pompously agreed, assuming these were mere entry-level foes, making them gloriously easy to vanquish. Cue the dramatic irony. One overconfident fool dashed headlong into the fray, his enormous sword held high above his head. He bellowed that this was clearly going to be the simplest 5 points of his life, practically savoring the win, completely oblivious that our sticky, gelatinous lap of reality was rapidly approaching. He channeled every ounce of his considerable muscle mass into a powerful downward slash aimed at a plummeting slime, dramatically shouting for the blob to accept its doom. However, the squishy target suddenly executed a mid-air maneuver that contradicted every law of standard monster physics. The slime performed a dazzling aerial elevation, completely sidestepping the huge weapon as its malleable body fluidly twisted and contorted with surprising grace. Let me be clear, these were not the generic, sluggish puddles of goo you read about in textbooks. These were agile, intelligent ninjas in disguise. The privileged student hadn't even finished processing his missed opportunity when the slime launched its devastating counter-offensive. The blue menace shot directly towards his noble visage like a highly motivated, sticky torpedo, leaving him utterly without a moment to raise a defensive shield. The noble's features instantly transformed into a textbook definition of utter terror as the goo rapidly approached. He had the sudden, dreadful epiphany that he was currently prey, having wildly miscalculated who the predator was in this little dance. The blob connected right on his mud with a satisfyingly wet smack sound. It was such a severe, humiliating collision that I'm quite certain it managed to fracture his aristocratic schnoz and simultaneously obliterate his fragile ego. The entitled student tumbled onto his backside while the slime cheerfully caromed away, sounding oddly satisfied with its work. Somewhere nearby, another applicant shrieked in genuine astonishment, horrified to witness a supposedly superior peer defeated by glorified, sentient gel, though, suddenly, an absolute deluge of additional slimes began plummeting down, impacting the hard floor with deeply concerning thump noises. The testing area quickly escalated into a chaotic battlefield composed entirely of bouncy, devastating, blue caves. An individual frantically pointed toward the ceiling, shouting a warning that the bouncy downpour was unrelenting. The candidates were now tripping over themselves trying to evade the assault, their earlier cockiness vanishing faster than free pizza, marking the moment their entire worldview shifted dramatically. Utter pandemonium exploded as countless hopefuls suffered direct hits from the sticky, water, balloon assaults of the slimes. One unfortunate soul let out an anguished howl of pure defeat as they were pancaked flat against the stone, officially signaling the depressing conclusion of their academic career. The slimes ricocheted around the combat zone like tiny, blue, lethal bumper cars, tagging participants indiscriminately with surprisingly high velocity impacts. Essentially, we were all trapped inside a colossal, high-stakes pinball machine, and sadly, every single one of us was a frantic, defenseless metal ball. Up on the observation deck, the proctors remained utterly serene, meticulously jotting down the accruing scores. They loudly announced tallies based on the successful dodges and defeats, handling this gruesome fight for survival as if they were merely counting sheep or tallying up laundry. One proctor casually noted to the principal that this particular examination session featured the spoiled progeny of renowned dynastic lineages, specifically mentioning the Arankar and Durhan houses. This meant that the failure risk involved substantially more political repercussions than the average testing day. Young Kane Arankar was zipping around like a caffeinated superhero, making the slime evasion look criminally easy, while a fiery redhead adjacent to him mirrored his movements perfectly. The impressed proctor mused aloud whether these talented youngsters might actually shatter the Academy's all-time scoring benchmarks. The proctor darted a quick look in my direction and inquired of Smith if the juvenile he had recently offered assistance to was similarly of low social standing. The official was quite clearly bewildered by how a non-noble like myself was managing to execute such a shockingly high level of performance. Smith regarded me with a deeply enigmatic glimmer in his pupils, stating cryptically that I represented a highly intriguing variable and might provide the faculty with a truly memorable spectacle this afternoon. He had obviously placed a high-stakes, silent wager on me producing a spectacular result. The proctor nervously pushed his spectacles further up his nose ridge, his expression shifting to confusion. He hesitantly observed that for a significant duration, something entirely illogical had been unfolding, then directed everyone's attention squarely toward the arena's chaotic epicenter. He specifically pointed out that the slimes were bouncing all around me without making physical contact. It truly must have looked like something ripped straight out of a bizarre painting. The arena was pure, kinetic lunacy. Upright in the absolute middle, I remained perfectly still, resembling a stone gargoyle weathering a hurricane. I was neither side-stepping nor intercepting. I was merely existing. Nearby applicants were already using precious oxygen to ridicule me. A loudmouth contender bellowed questions about my baffling stillness, fully convinced that the slimes had simply exceeded my maximum reaction speed and that I had essentially given up the ghost. The different high-status brat sneered dismissively that peasant lineage always shows itself eventually, guaranteeing I would be eliminated momentarily regardless. They were all cackling heartily at my expense, failing completely to grasp the brilliant, terrifying strategy I was currently employing. Without warning, an exceptionally enormous blue slime, noticeably bulkier than its peers, detached and began plummeting straight toward the ground. This monstrous, gelatinous projectile was targeted directly at my skull, accelerating downwards with unnervingly high velocity. I kept my eyelids firmly shut, maintaining my position as the gigantic blob consumed the remaining spatial gap. Was this the final, pathetic act of surrender, or was I expertly timing the infinitesimal split second needed for maximum impact? The real test was just starting. I maintained my statuesque posture, exhibiting total tranquility even as multiple Asher blobs screamed toward my body. I didn't spare them a single glance, my concentration entirely focused internally, gearing up for an imminent burst of acceleration so ludicrously fast it would short-circuit the observation deck's mental capacity. With a dazzling, momentary flicker of azure light, I executed a series of precise evasions, my blinding speed causing residual trails of motion to hang visibly in the air. The remaining contestants could only stare in utterly stupefied amazement, their jaws slackened by the unbelievable, physics-defying agility displayed by the supposed commoner. A certain fancy-pants student shouted out loud, clearly baffled by how I managed to duck that shot, while another looked equally flabbergasted, certain there was zero chance I could have slipped that very close encounter. Another glob of goo zipped past, moving quicker than a skyrocket, yet next to my internal clock, it appeared to be moving at the pace of drying pain, because my awareness operates on a totally different frequency. That ooze I just sighed, steps back onto the dirt floor with a dull, heavy splat, kicking up a tiny cloud of grit, but I was already sliding into a better position, my gaze hunting the next threat before the first one settled down. Take a peek at that stern expression, pure frozen granite determination. I gave a quick sighed, glance, my own face betraying almost zero exertion as I geared up for the subsequent onslaught. The atmosphere above the arena was literally showering us with blue gelatinous blobs, falling in unnervingly straight, deadly paths, but I stayed firmly planted, my thoughts racing 100 leagues an hour while mapping every single trajectory. That conceited nobleman from before was back to his usual smuggness, grinning like a cartoon villain watching the sludge descend, positive that my demise was imminent, fully expecting to see me swashed flat. My features were set in an almost meditation-like placidity, my eyelids slightly drooped as I sank into a profound level of concentration. Because this level of skill stems from training that would make a normal human expire, I briefly shuttered my eyes, effectively unplugging the visual input to crank up the volume on my other senses and my cognitive horsepower, entering the hush right before the absolute chaos erupted. A sudden flashback struck me, the younger version of myself standing amidst a frosty, snow-covered fields, and a tiny imaginary speech bubble just said, "Perhaps chuck some stones about." My early years were certainly not mundane. Little did the world realize the future spectacle. A gaggle of neighborhood children stood there clutching pebbles, looking rather perplexed and slightly concerned, with one asking if I was completely serious, while another noted the distinct danger if one of those rocks actually connected with my head. Pidged, we just offered a soft smile, holding a tiny pocket watch, assuring them everything was under control, sporting a very I know something you don't know attitude as I explained I needed to test out a particular specialized maneuver. The youngsters finally relented and began pelting me with everything they could muster, one kid shouting out a warning to ensure I ducked as the projectile shot through the chilly atmosphere toward my position. Stones were whizzing from every conceivable angle, resembling a miniature version of this current slime trial, proving that even as a mere child, I was conditioning my mind to process incoming high-speed threats in a survival setting. Back to the current moment, if you please. My left eye had adopted this incredibly focused, target-locking design that seemed to shimmer intensely within it. I mentally worked through my complex methodology right there. My goal was to condition the rapid transmission of impulses from my sensory processing center to my balance and coordination hub. Seriously, who needs to use just 10% of their gray matter, right? I could literally perceive the mental circuitry in my cranium igniting with fresh connections as I computed the incoming hazards instantaneously, transforming myself into a working, breathing calculation engine, sifting through information much quicker than the blink of an eye allows. Further mental imagery displayed the sheer, breathtaking intricacy of this process. I genuinely felt that if I could react immediately based on these lightning-fast sums, I should manage to shrug off any conceivable incoming offense. The initial step is gathering intel, so I remained fixed in the center of the ring, my brain eagerly vacuuming up data points from every single descending slime globule, feeling the pressure but thriving in this high-stake scenario. Next comes the heavy lifting. My eye constricted, the glowing blue motif inside spiraling as I digitally locked onto every single projectile's path, the entire universe seeming to drag its feet while my brain finished its turbocharged arithmetic. Finally, the escape maneuver, executed in a series of perfectly economical, optimally timed shifts, letting me thread through the falling slime as if performing some kind of elegant, minimalist choreography, wasting not a millimeter of movement, making the impossible seem totally routine. The rest of the competitors were utterly paralyzed, their faces turning the color of weak tea as they watched me pull off what amounted to backstage magic, slowly comprehending they weren't even participating in the same contest. I permitted myself a swift inhalation and dabbed my brow, emitting a small, satisfied sound of triumph, admitting that even I was a little impressed by the flawless execution of my specialized mind. Skull, the void combat calculation, this afternoon, the vivid recollection of the youngsters rushing toward me, squealing with delight, demanding an explanation of my feat, asking if this was a brand new magic trick, and how incredibly awesome it all looked, treating me already like some sort of spandex clad hero. And for them, this was merely the opening act. Demmer, we held up one digit like a professor explaining a complex theorem, announcing the title of my incredible mental program, which I dubbed Void Combat Calculation, leaving the other kids utterly bewildered, struggling to process the grandiose moniker. Returning to the present situation, I flashed a small, self-assured grin, entirely confident in the ultimate outcome, knowing precisely how this confrontation would wrap up since I had already simulated the entire event inside my head a dozen times over. The resolution of this ridiculous skirmish. The implications of those words hung heavy as I began preparing for a swift counterattack. I was no longer just evading. I was seizing complete dominance over the entire battlefield. I stood amidst the gelatin sparsh, a glowing azure orb beginning to flare around me. It's simply a technique, I mused, as the energy gathered for my next move. This technique predicts the future outcome of every single movement, bounce, and impact. I essentially forced for every possibility before it happened through pure mathematical calculation. My eyes blazed with brilliant blue light, and static electricity sparked around my head, as I reached peak performance, fully synchronized with my void calculations. Through my enhanced vision, the world was reduced to complex physics equations. I processed the momentum, velocity, and trajectory of every falling slime, turning the chaotic arena into a solvable math problem. War equations covered the slimes as they zipped through the air. I calculated their mass and force in real time, guaranteeing that every dodge I made was absolutely optimal. From above, I visualized the arena as a giant calculation grid, with me positioned perfectly at the center of a huge energy web, becoming the master of this coordinate plane. I noticed that while the slimes were quick and strong, their fatal flaw was that they could only charge in a straight line, a limitation I was exploiting for everything it was worth. I calculated the precise angles and speeds of their rebounds off the walls and floor, creating a perfect map of their movements in my mind. It was like playing a high-speed game of pool against myself. Dodging was ridiculously easy. I soared, gliding across the arena floor with zero effort. The slimes whizzed past me, missing by mere inches as I moved through the chaos like a ghost. I kept a running mental tally of my points as I wove through the attacks. 4 dodges for 8 points, and already planning my next step. I gripped my training sword, the handle squeaking under my strength. It was time to stop dodging and start collecting those specific bonuses. What happened next completely astonished them. In one fluid motion, I sliced through multiple slimes at once. The brilliant blue arc of energy followed my blade, wiping out a huge portion of the attacking wave. I let out a roar, declaring that it was now my turn. I had officially stopped being the target and had become the hunter in this arena. I unleashed my martial arts technique, the flurry of high-speed cuts that turned the falling slimes into blue mist. The sheer skill on display was enough to make a professional swordsman jealous. Kane Erenko looked absolutely stunned. Even the top noble Erkoden believe a commoner possessed this level of technical mastery. The proctors in the booth were completely losing their minds, one wondering if I was actually reading the slime's movements, and the other noting my incredible perception. They exclaimed that my talent rivaled even a professional fighter, which for a 13-year-old applicant was the highest possible compliment from an academy proctor. Kane watched me with genuine respect, finally understanding that my performance was due to specialized skill, not luck, and probably deciding right then to try and team up. I stood completely ready, my breathing perfectly controlled even after that intense flurry, scanning for new points with my competitive fire burning brighter than ever. Another slime came hurtling toward me, but I had already locked onto her. I wasn't going to let a single point slip away. I executed a lightning fast thrust, skewering the slime and claiming another 5 points. I was functioning like a literal point grinding machine, but just as I was about to land another hit, a rapier suddenly flashed into view and stole my kill. Kane Erenko had entered the fight, showing off some pretty impressive speed of his own. I gave Kane a look of pure annoyance, my face clouded in shadow, demanding to know if he was stealing my points, because I absolutely hate when people interfere with my score. Kane just gave me a smug look, completely unconcerned, responding that he hadn't stolen anything from me, all while preparing his next witty remark. He flicked his rapier with practiced elegance, sending the vanquished slime flying away as he kept his eyes fixed on the rest of the arena. The slime was neatly sliced in two, proving that Kane's precision nearly rivaled my own skill. We were obviously the top dogs of this exam, but fate had other plans entirely. Kane glanced over at Chief's group of nobles, who were busy struggling intensely with their own slimes, his smirk widening as he began to formulate a plan. Our cunning hero confessed to strategically pilfering victories from those insufferably pompous nobles, essentially ensuring they remained stuck in the lower echelons, a truly villainous yet effective tactic. He certainly has a knack for mischief, doesn't he? This fellow, Kane, introduced himself with a flourish, then casually inquired if I fancied embarking on a grand point, pilfering adventure as a team, a rather unexpected gesture from a high-ranking noble assigned to a mere commoner like myself. My face remained stubbornly unimpressed, a skeptical eyebrow probably doing Olympic gymnastics as I returned his gaze, simply unaccustomed to such bluntness from the aristocracy, and certainly not in the market for a new boss. I laid down a few non-negotiable stipulations, clarifying that my sole objective was reaching the absolute top, and furthermore, why not transform his cozy partnership proposal into a thrilling, bard scoring contest. Kane's gaze instantly ignited with a fierce flicker of a true competitor, and he practically dared me to unleash my complete might, evidently thrilled to finally encounter an opponent capable of genuinely challenging his impressive abilities. A mischievous grin mirrored his enthusiasm, and I remarked that he certainly exuded self-assurance regarding his prowess, adding that since he was so insistent, I was prepared to remove the metaphorical training wheels and demonstrate what genuine power truly entailed. The brilliant cerulean energy began to emanate from my limbs as I geared up for my subsequent action, the very atmosphere crackling with an undeniable electricity, signaling the imminent arrival of something utterly colossal. We stood back to back, a formidable pair, and I threw in a spicy condition. The loser obeys the winner. Pin, quite intrigued, noted that I was the very first person to ever make demands of him, which was saying something. The cowering minion of Sheath observed our display from afar, beads of nervous perspiration cascading down his face as the sheer magnitude of our combined power dawned on him, leading him to grumble under his breath, sensing their grand scheme was already unraveling. Lord Sheath, quite literally seething with rage, clutched his bow so tightly his knuckles turned ghostly white, while his cronies huddled, whispering about his directives. Now that Kane and I had joined forces, they were orchestrating a truly despicable ambush amidst the pandemonium of the exam. Sheath's lips stretched into a truly villainous shadow, cloak smile, signaling his full approval, confirming once and for all that this fellow was undoubtedly the most deplorable individual in the entire academy, poised to make our lives incredibly miserable. While a swishy, green blob of her slime came hurtling their way, Sheath's posse had completely abandoned all pretense of caring about mere exam points. Their singular, unwavering objective now centered entirely on annihilating Kane and me through any method conceivable. Sheath bellowed a furious command for them to proceed, simultaneously drawing his bowstring taut to its absolute maximum tension, clearly no longer interested in a mere slime, his unwavering gaze now firmly fixed upon me, and in that precise moment, the entire dynamic irrevocably shifted. I observed the projectile streaking through the air in a blinding blur, while Kane and I remained resolutely unmoving, and with a swift, deceptive peek over my shoulder, I instantly registered the menacing danger rapidly approaching. A veritable tempest of arrows descended upon us, launched by Sheath's rather enthusiastic entourage, but I was already casually peering over my shoulder, my astonishingly efficient brain rapidly crunching the numbers on these fresh, deadly flight paths. The deadly projectiles zipped across the open space, weaving a perilous tapestry of crisscrossing danger right in the arena's heart, clearly escalating far beyond mere unsportsmanlike conduct. This was a full-blown murder attempt masquerading as an academic assessment. Kane found himself utterly flabbergasted. The genuine expression of pure astonishment etched onto his features as a rogue arrow narrowly missed his ear, apparently having not anticipated his supposedly dignified noble peers would ever descend to such depths of depravity, especially with the principal watching. Sheath allowed himself a smug little smile, his hand already instinctively moving to grab another arrow, utterly convinced he had us trapped, and clearly relishing every single moment of our supposed predicament. Truly a delightful chap, that one, if you enjoy sheer villainy. But hold on a second, a casually dismissive, almost mocking sound escaped my lips, because I was intact, still upright, wearing the unmistakable expression which unequivocally declared I had just pulled off a feat of utter, delightful impossibility. Sheath's eyeballs seemed on the verge of launching themselves from their sockets as he let out a guttural shriek of pure, unadulterated disbelief, his gaze fixed on an act that, by all logical accounts, should have been utterly beyond the capabilities of a mere commoner youngster. I remained utterly unperturbed, casually cradling a handful of arrows, including those infused with potent energy, gripped securely in my open palm, having effortlessly snagged a truly deadly magical assault as though it were nothing more than an irritating buzzing insect. Both Sheath and his bumbling henchmen were now positively drenched in nervous perspiration, sputtering incoherently as they grappled with the baffling reality of me catching arrows with my bare hands, their minds utterly failing to compute such an impossibly swift reaction time. I casually rejoined Kane, who worriedly checked if I was okay, but I simply shrugged it off, declaring Sheath and his pathetic crew to be pure garbage for their underhanded tactics, solidifying my position as, quite frankly, the calmest and most impressive individual in the entire room. Sheath was now utterly incandescent with fury, his hand visibly trembling as he notched his next arrow, then shrieked, demanding to know whom I dared call scum, his delicate pride finally shattering into a million tiny fragments, clearly intending to unleash a world of misery upon this impudent youth. Sheath dramatically deployed his patented maneuver, the double arrow edge, unleashing a pair of arrows wreathed in menacing, dark violet energy, which were definitely not your garden variety projectiles, but rather meticulously crafted to obliterate any rudimentary protective measures. Those ominous projectiles whizzed across the arena's expanse with uncanny precision, truly reminiscent of malevolent homing missiles, unerringly targeting both Kane and myself. Their sheer, unadulterated power coursing the very atmosphere to thrum with a palpable dark energy. Cain found himself desperately deflecting the mundane arrows with his elegant rapier, plainly overwhelmed by the sheer, relentless volume of incoming projectiles, letting out a genuine gasp as he belatedly understood he had severely misjudged the depths of Sheath's frantic resolve. Then, one of those sinister purple energy arrows suddenly materialized, growing ominously larger and devouring the intervening space in what felt like less than an instant, presenting a truly frightful tableau as it hurtled unequivocally towards an unescapable impact. Cain stood absolutely transfixed for a mere fraction of a second, his eyes impossibly wide as the malevolent dark air rapidly closed in on his chest, utterly immobilized by the shocking speed of the attack, making it seem like the final curtain call for the esteemed Rancor Scion. Abruptly, an immense surge of sinister, shadowy power detonated with a deafening roar, appearing to be a truly fatal strike, which left any observant bystander desperately pondering the fate of both our illustrious selves. The point blank explosion failed spectacularly to take me out. My hand was gushing blood after I caught that volley of high-speed arrows from the noble squad, while Cain looked horrified, realizing I took a serious hit to protect him. Cain yelled at me to check the wound, but I was already zoned in on a different problem. I narrowed my eyes, silver hair obscuring my expression as I coldly realized I was their actual target. Up in the observation deck, the proctors were sweating buckets of anxiety. One official noted that the attack clearly carried malicious intent and asked the principal if they should just disqualify the noble group immediately. Principal Smith, however, remained completely unruffled, keeping his purple eyes fixed below. He decided to hold off on disqualification for now, stating they'd lose anyway, but told the staff to prepare healing potions for the imminent fallout. Back on the floor, the gravity spell continued to press down on everyone, but Cain and I held our ground without flinching. I called out to Cain, keeping my voice steady despite the injury, as more slimes continued to rain down around us. I started winding up my sword arm like a professional athlete preparing to clear the bases. I asked Cain if he'd ever heard of baseball, which was a ridiculous bit of showboating in the middle of a magic exam. Two slimes came streaking down toward me at high speed, but I was already moving to meet them. I wasn't just planning to dodge this time. I was carefully calculating the perfect counter attack, moving faster than anyone thought possible. I leaped into the air and snagged a slime in mid-flight. Blue electrical sparks crackled around my body as I used my martial arcane techniques to grab the monster. My eye lit up with a familiar targeting pattern as I finished my calculations. I realized I had no choice but to go through with this, and a determined snarl spread across my face as I prepared to return fire. I spun around in the air, with a blue slime clinging stubbornly to the tip of my training sword like a piece of bubblegum. I was generating a significant amount of centrifugal force for the next move. With a shout of launch, I hurled the slime toward the noble group, firing it with the force of a high-speed projectile. It looked exactly like a blue meteor ready to completely ruin their entire day. The noble archer froze in sheer panic as the projectile shrieked toward him. He had been so focused on playing dirty that he forgot who he was up against, and now it was far too late to run, and things were about to get much worse. The slime connected with a huge boom, generating a devastating burst of blue energy upon impact. My defensive phase was officially over. I had changed strategies and started hunting the hunters. The unfortunate noble was launched backward and off the stage, screaming in pain as he went. I generally find that holding back is overrated when someone decides to mess with me first. A notification flashed above the noble's head. Readings, number 438. Disqualified. He had scoffed at this being a commoner-esque game. Dead here he was, flat on the ground with a 0 score and a very bruised sense of superiority. The rest of the noble group was completely freaking out, having just watched their teammate get wiped out in one hit. I stood there looking completely bored, which was probably the most terrifying thing they had ever seen. The second archer started searching wildly, his bow shaking like a leaf. He mumbled in frustration, trying to figure out where I had vanished to, completely losing track of me. I shouted over here, then dropped from above like some kind of ninja, catching the archer completely off guard from behind. I was moving so quickly around the arena that it felt like I was teleporting. I landed a high-speed blow on another noble, generating a huge explosive impact. I kept a mental tally, shouting number 2, as I knocked out another member of their squad. A different noble took a slime right to the face at close range. It was a brutal defeat as the blue blob completely bypassed her defenses, and I was just doing a little spring cleaning on the battlefield at this point. She went spiraling into the air and landed with a painful thud on the ground. It was an absolute bloodbath for the noble group, and the proctors were stuck watching it all happen without intervening. The last noble standing was sweating profusely, his face contorted into a mask of pure terror. He gasped, realizing he was the only one left to face this absolute nightmare. I materialized right behind him, leaning in to whisper, "You're the last one." In his ear, that was some serious horror movie stuff, and he probably passed out before I even finished the sentence. I loomed over the last guy, looking completely unengaged with my sword balanced on my shoulder. The noble tried a pathetic final threat, insisting that the older students wouldn't let a mere commoner get away with this. I casually stepped right on the guy's foot, causing him to shriek in pain. I said that must sting, with absolutely zero genuine concern, which was some peak petty behavior. and they still had no clue what was about to happen next. The noble tumbled backward clutching his foot, while Kane watched from a safe distance. Kane chimed in with "Be more careful next time," clearly enjoying watching the snobby group get taken down a peg. Kane approached me with a friendly grin. He thanked me for covering him earlier and asked if my hand was alright, genuinely worried about the commoner who had just saved his skin. I glanced at my freshly bandaged hand and gave Kane a pointed grin. I replied that I was fine, and added that he was actually pretty decent for a noble, which was basically the ultimate compliment coming from me. Kane insisted I shouldn't group him together with those other nobles, before revealing his true identity. He asked if I'd ever heard of the great families, explaining that he belonged to one, the Ranker family, and he said it with obvious and deserved pride. Whispers reached me about those legendary clans that spawned countless masters and geniuses, actually rivaling the throne and the magic guild in sheer brawn. My excitement stayed at zero, since dwelling on high-class snobs felt like a chore while I had blue blobs to slaughter instead of reading birth certificates. The other participants were losing their patience with me, screaming that some random nobody was ruining their day, their egos suffering more damage than their ribs. The trio of grumpy aristocrats cornered me like they wanted a scrap, their leader barking about stopping my point streak while his head veins looked ready to pop. They lunged forward as a group, hollering for peasants to evaporate and ignoring the actual test, turning the center stage into a literal class warfare mosh pit. Another pack of pupils noticed Kane getting ganged up on and jumped in, shouting that their golden child needed backup while pulling out steel to defend him. They roared about crushing those budget nobles, turning the stadium into a giant brawl where students clashed and the slimes became an afterthought. Everything descended into madness with swords clinking and shields thumping, while the supervisor remarked on the riot and suggested everyone try not to die. Across the way, the ginger girl with a wooden staff enjoyed the violence with a creepy smirk, commenting that the situation was finally getting entertaining. She signaled her buddy, Miliarner, and they both dove into the scrap, clearly intending to farm points while the others played bumper cars, which changed the game. While dodging an attack, I considered how annoying this sudden fame felt, knowing that if my score kept climbing, the headache would only get worse. The jelly ball suddenly lunged, forcing me into a matrix. Sal limber pose, though I let out a gasp when the heavy gravity made my legs feel like bricks. The girl with sky-colored hair, Miliarner, launched a fancy kid flying, showcasing agility and talent that seemed way beyond her youthful appearance. A massive wave of orange sparks cleared a huge patch of the floor, signaling that the big dogs were done being polite and had started playing for keeps. People were getting tossed like ragdolls as a gargantuan mallet hit the floor, wielded by a guy who was basically a human wrecking ball with a haircut. Say hello to the red-haired Tamernut, who was laughing his head off and having a grand old time, screaming that this massacre was absolutely delightful. He stood over a pile of unconscious knobs with his massive tool on his shoulder, grinning like a loon while mentioning that punching people felt much better. We added that bullying kids beat squashing slimes any day, swinging that heavy steel like a toothpick, clearly more interested in hunting humans than monsters. He went into a full helicopter spin, turning his weapon into a blur of doom that created a vortex, knocking way in and one unfortunate enough to be close. The mallet maniac bellowed for the crowd to scram, his eyes glowing with a wild light as he lost his cool and looked for something new to break. It was total destruction, with students flying around like laundry in a cyclone while painful shrieks echoed from every single corner of the room. He stood there victorious with his mallet buried in the concrete as the smoke cleared, the solo army that nobody felt brave enough to actually confront. The floor was covered in defeated snobs who looked like they had seen their own funerals, while the hammer guy just loitered around hunting for a fresh snack. Up in the bird's eye view, the staff looked stressed, one asking the principal to stop the fight, but Smith just shrugged and praised the beauty of youth. The lady with green hair noted that disqualifying all the rich heirs might cause a political firestorm, but Faye had a different comedy routine planned. Principal Smith gave her a freezing stare, reminding her that the school has its own regulations and he wouldn't let noble feelings ruin his grading curve. Smith told her to ignore the haters because he was the one in charge, making it clear that inside this arena, only the strong get to torque. He finished his sentence just as a massive laser beam hit the floor from the ceiling, signaling the end and stopping the riot with divine timing. Smith shouted that the second phase was officially done, causing the blue gravity zones to vanish so everyone could finally stop gasping for air. The boss mentioned that rankings and scores would be posted later, pointing toward the exit because he was done with this mess and ready for dessert. The earth magic spell fizzled out, leaving students sprawled on the ground like spilled marbles. One chap whined about being wiped out, his pointy metal stick clanging on the floor. The staff scurried to sort out the day's tests takers, turning the arena into a temporary triage center with healers working overtime. I downed a fancy healing drink, musing that this must be what a magic potion feels like as the green glow instantly mended my wounded mitt. My jaw dropped when I learned even basic healing juice cost a small fortune of 3 silver coins, and my common brain screamed, highway robbery, pain, bless his clueless heart, asked what the fuss was about. Kane flashed a smug grin, declaring he wouldn't pick on me even if he won, which just made me want to face sperm. His noble act was really getting old. Principal Smith, with a theatrical snap of his fingers, conjured a gigantic, shimmering scroll right in the middle of the fighting pit. The suspense was thicker than a goblin-esque stew. The scroll unfurled with a flourish, revealing the names of the chosen few. And Kane, ever the inquisitive type, inquired about my score while everyone crowded around. Suddenly, the snooty noble kids erupted in a chorus of jeers, chortling that the nobody commoner wasn't even on the list. A quick glance confirmed only the creme de la creme got us out. Kane and I just stared at the scroll. A silent hang between us. Kane mumbled about the absence of any name, his eyes darting around like a lost puppy searching for his favorite chew toy. The examiner piped up, announcing that the top 5 contenders had shattered all previous benchmarks. The atmosphere crackled with historic significance and sheer anticipation. Landing 5th was Miliarna Royce, the petite, sapphire-haired lass who strutted onto the leaderboard like she owned it. She certainly looked the part, and with good reason. In 4th place, we had Kane our anchor. The crowd collectively gasped as the esteemed anchor name settled for a mere 4th, leaving Kane looking like he'd swallowed a very sour lemon. Tagging the bronze was Faye Durhan, the fiery-haired staff member who gave a sassy little wink, clearly aware of her impressive standing. I stood there, the storm cloud brewing behind my eyes, wondering if my name was truly absent or if I'd been disqualified for giving those bullies a taste of their own medicine. This cliffhanger was, frankly, annoying. Then came the jaw-dropper, 2nd place, Louis Carroll, with an unbelievable score of 887. This humble commoner was officially rewriting the history books. Kane Ranker's jaw hit the floor so hard it probably left a crater. He sputtered, posed that guy, utterly flabbergasted that a random kid had bested the heir to a prominent lineage. I just gave him an enigmatic gaze, my silver mane obscuring my eyes, and declared it a secret, relishing the utter pandemonium I was sowing among the privileged elite. Kane, defeated for the moment, sighed and started plotting his revenge, while I playfully reminded him of our post-exam wager, to which he gave a curt nod. The arena's tension ratcheted up as the announcer prepared for the grand finale, declaring that the esteemed 1st place was claimed by. The audience held its collective breath as the final name loomed, an unprecedented scenario where 2 commoners might seize the top 2 spots at the Empire's most renowned academy. The victor was revealed as Neil Gunn, scoring a colossal 888, just a whisper ahead of me, yet both of us had utterly obliterated the Academy's prior records. Neil Gunn, a formidable presence with fiery red hair and an untamed competitive spirit, grinned and challenged the newcomers not to bore him. The other students murmured in stunned disbelief, babbling about the massive dude and how 2 commoners had dominated, even outshining Faye from the esteemed Durhan clan. The old order was officially toast. Faye Durhan, the bronze medalist, cast a glance at young Miliarna Royce, who clutched her staff, clearly feeling the heat from the newly arrived powerhouses. Faye, the vision of noble prowess with her imposing sword, was already sizing up her rivals, secretly dreaming of her duel with someone as formidable as Neil. The slug nobles who had previously mocked me were now sulking in a corner, their wounded pride stinging as they grumbled about being bested by mere commoners. One of the proctors unleashed a verbal tirade, lambasting them as useless embarrassments to their noble heritage, clearly miffed that the so-called elites had been so thoroughly outdone by those they deemed beneath them. High up in the observation gallery, another proctor remarked on the unprecedented common sweep in the Tekken competition, noting the added shocker that both top contenders hailed from an orphanage. Principal Smith, with a weighty, knowing expression, inquired if they grasped the reason the Arcanist Association maintained orphanages, hinting a far more sinister secret lurking beneath the Academy's recruitment process. It was a striking tableau, Neil and I standing shoulder to shoulder, enveloped in auras of red and blue energy, a clear testament that true prowess knows no social boundaries, and we were living proof. Principal Smith spoke to the 1,000 leftover players, instructing the winners of round 2 to go to the following site, as the concluding part was going to be insane. Kane muscled toward me and observed that I nearly won, pondering which of us was superior, but I just offered a blurry shrug as we departed. We hit the 3rd workout zone that resembled a giant thicket, where Principal Smith announced the last test was a life, or death game starting right now. While floating above like a grumpy celestial being, Principal Smith detailed the badge, snatching Royal Rumble, which felt like a playground game with much more bleeding. We started handing out sparkly yellow pins to the students, mentioning that older kids would use teleportation spells to dump us in random forest spots like unwanted laundry. Kane and I eyed our new trinkets while realizing the peril, since Principal Smith claimed the goal was grabbing every possible badge through any mean strategy we chose. Losing carried a heavy price, since anyone who dropped their token was booted out instantly, as this jungle had no interest in second attempts. The bid reward was unveiled, stating only the top 10 badge holders would get in, making the competition look impossible with thousands of us fighting for 10 spots. Our crew decided to split up, with Kane mentioning that high-ranked students were basically walking bullseyes, so I just promised to stay upright and breathing. I ended up alone in the brush clutching my token, realizing the school revealed our ranks just to make sure we were hunted like expensive steaks. Principal Smith shouted a final terrifying command to use our full power, obviously enjoying the social chaos he created, and this was only the start. He ordered us to stay alive until the finish because school entry was one win away. Then the scene shifted to the woods where the slaughter began. A heavy boot crushed the grass right behind my back, and a voice screamed for the commoner, showing me that trouble arrived before I found my bearings. The giant rich student with a massive hatchet showed up looking extremely angry, yelling that he caught me after I made his noble friends look stupid, and he seemed to want my head rather than just my pin. I gave him a chilly look from the corner of my eye, feeling zero fear but plenty of annoyance that my quiet morning was ruined by a loudmouth. The hatchet guy brought some buddies including an archer, and they chuckled about how my friend wasn't there to help me, thinking I was easy prey. I surveyed the creeps surrounding me while looking for a gap or a way to hit back, knowing I was outnumbered but already planning their downfall. The wealthy squad spread out to trap me in a clearing, the crossbow guy aiming his bow while the axe wielder prepared to charge like a bull. That was when I realized things were fishy, figuring the transport staff must have sold my location, meaning this was a head job rather than bad luck. The axe wielder shouted that the torquing was over and leaped into the air for a smash, putting his entire body weight into a strike meant to flatten me. He hollered for my death while slanting the blade down, but I just barely skipped away from the crash, the edge hitting the dirt where I stood. Two more aristocrats charged in with spears and blades, screaming that I wouldn't escape while trying to stab me while I was still dodging the axe. Moving like a lightning bolt, I jumped up and did a perfect backflip to evade several stabs and arrows. Since my speed was basically off the scale, I touched down softly but sensed a new danger coming. Looking behind me as a sudden glint of light caught my vision. I blocked a mid-air hit with my dull sword clashing against a shimmering green weapon, and through the sparks I saw I was fighting a pro, but things got even worse. I skidded across the turf with my blade out, wondering what that move was, as I was genuinely shocked by how fast that last strike moved. The axe guy got back up looking even more red-faced, screaming that I would perish and should just surrender, though he was clearly starting to panic. I had to defend from several sides at once, planking metal with three rich kids, the sound of combat echoing through the trees as I held them back. One noble tried to sneak around my side but I caught his blade, with sparks flying as I fought with a terrifying level of precision. Suddenly a bunch of glowing green daggers flew through the air, looking like high-speed wind sorcery that was zooming toward me very quickly. My optics popped wide when I realized it was time for another frantic dance. I clenched my jaw, my magnificent mind instantly running the complex math on these incoming annoyances. I flicked a troublesome air slice away with a perfectly timed countermove. It seemed I was facing the sequel, meaning we had officially upgraded from fisticuffs to serious, tived, octane wizardry. The posh wizard responsible for all the windy shenanigans let loose a rather unpleasant cackle, yelling that I should accept my fate. Thrilled that this lower budget peasant was apparently having a bad day, he bragged loudly, utterly stunned that a magically challenged plebeian like myself was still successfully ducking his aerodynamic ammunition. But really, he was only feeding my internal spreadsheet. I kept sashaying through their pathetic onslaught, employing movements so tidy they looked like minimal effort, causing the frustrated nobles to whine loudly that I simply wouldn't stop playing dodgeball. Stealing a glance at the glowing, tickly green exhaust fumes of the spells, I muttered that unfortunately, predicting wizard math wasn't in my skill set, uncovering a rather critical flaw in my cosmic algebra. I inhaled deeply, settling into the kind of focused expression usually reserved for tax season, concluding quietly that if this was the case, it was time to change the entire playbook. I conjured the ghost of her classic physical technique, deciding on the preemptive strike known as sen no sen, because sometimes you just have to return to the basics of being a world-class authority on fighting. My vision suddenly pulsed with an exciting, electric sapphire hue, as I announced my intent to weaponize my foe's own strength, the classic sign of a true expert who uses hubris as a demolition tool. The head honcho of the aristocratic squad was losing his patience dramatically, bellowing at his cronies to stop dithering and engage immediately, demanding the initiation of the grand finale attack. The entire posh party advanced simultaneously, a furious cyclone of sharpened steel and flashy spells rapidly closing the distance, confirming this was the final exam, and the atmosphere smelled distinctly of murder. I simply offered a dramatically unimpressed sigh, letting a dangerous little smirk settle onto my lips, confirming I wasn't merely prepared. I had practically sent them a personalized invitation for this moment. Yelling with precision that could set a watch, I surged ahead, completely flipping the script on my foes, transforming myself from the hunted to the maestro directing this clumsy production, which frankly, ruined their day immediately. I casually snagged one aristocrat's wild sword swing halfway through its arc. The idiot screamed, convinced he'd won the lottery, failing to notice he had just stepped squarely into my meticulously arranged bear trap. Utilizing the poor fellow's own kinetic energy, I pivoted him around and deployed his squishy frame as a human barricade against the incoming unpleasantness, essentially treating the whole noble class like disposable crash test dummies. I delivered a catastrophic elbow right into the guy I was gripping, accompanied by a sound that suggested something expensive had broken, confirming this wasn't spellcasting. It was just the beauty of raw, unforgiving applied physics, in a blur of movement that would make a montage editor proud. I dispatched two more entitled opponents using a delightful combination of a helicopter kick and a precision slap, maneuvering so smoothly I practically looked like I was starring in a ballet. One aristocrat experienced in scheduled flight time, shrieking in utter disbelief, while his colleague kissed the dirt with a miserable yelp, illustrating how quickly this entire noble surprise party was being ruined, pleased by expensive peas. The remaining wizard attempted to launch his final, desperate breath of air, but I had already teleported beside him, casually blocking the blast and eliminating the gap. Frankly, this whole ordeal was already in the credits. Just then, an enormous explosion of glowing, emerald energy suddenly raised half the landscape, suggesting that a bored spectator had decided to weigh in and finish the proceedings with extreme prejudice. I glanced around as several more aristocrats were suddenly ejected skyward like champagne corks, confirming decisively that I definitely didn't have the monopoly on the high-end pest control business in the specific woodland. One foolhardy noble tried to rush my position one more time, only to be instantly vaporized by a direct power hit that sent him to orbit, leaving me to observe placidly, wondering who my secret, explosive ally was. The last noble landed with a sickening thump and a muttered obscenity, all while I stood perfectly unruffled, noting that the whole unfortunate welcoming committee had been comprehensively deleted from the map. I casually draped my weapon across my shoulder, projecting an air of monumental indifference. I was quite ready to depart, but professional courtesy required me to perform a final inventory check first. A colossal ray of pure energy descended from the heavens, utterly vaporizing a poor, unsuspecting pine tree in a spectacular flash, prompting a terrified yelp from someone who had clearly experienced collateral damage. That tree had literally ceased existing, confirming the outrageous horsepower behind that particular detonation. This was obviously advanced wizardry, far exceeding the petty parlor tricks used by the recently incapacitated aristocracy. I surveyed the immediate consequences, observing the mound of thoroughly defeated aristocrats scattered amidst the shrubbery. It had been a flawless victory, leaving me standing tall, but clearly, the universe had booked the sequel. I spotted several official-looking badges shimmering gently on the earth with a comforting gold hue, realizing these ruffians had apparently pooled their resources for an impressive collection. I bent down and gathered up their shiny participation trophies with a satisfying little clink, marking the official beginning of my necessary hoard required for academic enrollment. Gazing upon the messy heap of vanquished students, I stated simply that these were mine now, since I firmly believe one should never ignore free resources, particularly when they are vital components for receiving a passing grade. The pompous squad leader glared heavenward with a face full of throbbing blood vessels and bruised ego. He shrieked for me to quit overthinking things, refusing to accept losing against a commoner. A gloomy patch shaded him. A voice inquired if he might be targeting the wrong victim, and that sinister tone implied this character was much more lethal than any average aristocrat. Kane Ranker suddenly plummeted out of the canopy, dumping onto the soil with massive force. He appeared utterly exhausted by boredom, acting like he was merely wandering through some bushes. Perched upon a tall bough, Kane dangled his feet while eyeing the sobbing blue-blood. He grinned, remarking that it was quite a pity the guy's magic supply had finally evaporated. The wealthy brat was totally losing his grip, stuttering out pleased to know why Kane arrived, since his buddies were supposed to be blocking him. Clearly rattled by the sudden entrance, flashing a terrifying sneer, Kane noted he forced their strategy out of them, mocking their attempts to slow him down with such losers, obviously possessing much more wit than his targets. Finally snapping, that noble screeched about finishing us both, his skin turning a vibrant shade of violet as he completely checked out from reality. With a tired groan, Kane smacked him with the base of his blade, sending him face first into the dirt, marking a compassionate conclusion to such a pathetic struggle. I marched over, looking slightly irked by all the racket, complaining about the volume while checking if Kane survived, which was basically the peak of my emotional range. Hopping down, Kane threw a pile of lifted tokens toward me, joking that those rookie wizards were barely worth his effort, mimicking my own cocky vibe while delivering the loot. Snatching the rewards, I warned that frequent ambushes would become a chore, offering assistance, but he dismissed me with a smug look, proving we were both solitary idiots. Out of the blue, rhythmic clapping started in the darkness. A voice praised our confidence, revealing the crimson-paired girl Faye who looked ready to stir up some serious chaos. The ginger-paired brawler I spotted previously, Faye Durahan, advanced while brandishing her polearm with terrifying poise. She bypassed the pleasantries to stare me down, insisting on a duel. Kane whispered the backstory, naming her as the Grandmaster's offspring, her status and family crest making her essentially a goddess in the world of professional stabbing. I remained unbothered, questioning if she was his romantic partner, which made Kane bark that he would never associate with such a brainless brawler while turning away in disgust. Eventually, Kane confessed she previously thrashed him in a duel, though he tried to claim he was just having an off day, an excuse I found entirely laughable. Irritated by our private jokes, Faye screamed for us to stop our flirting and face her, so I told Kane we should just ignore the lady and keep hunting for loot. Now fuming with rage, Faye labeled Kane a terrified coward for running away with his companion just because he feared losing, successfully poking every one of his nerves. I finally caved, telling her sure with a stone-faced expression, admitting I was curious to see if a child of such a prestigious house actually knew how to scrap. Her eyes widened with a feral spark, embracing the duel. To keep things fair she announced she would abstain from magic, relying purely on her technical polearm mastery. Skipping any warning, she shot forward like a scarlet rocket, aiming her pointed weapon at my chest with terrifying speed. My vision sharpened as I tracked the incoming strike, my eyes showing my focus as my brain entered a state of rapid combat analysis. I diverted the spear tip with a sharp, calculated twitch of my wooden sword, the collision sending a pulse through the dirt as we measured our roar power. Faye flashed a creepy little smile, clearly shocked that a lower-born nobody could block her opening move so casually. realizing I was a completely different beast. I held my position, my blade remaining steady while waiting for her follow. She finished her sentence, admitting I had some actual skill for a guy without a surname. Faye immediately ramped up the intensity, putting more muscle into her thrusts. She was no longer just testing me but trying to break my stance with sheer brutality. Actual sparks sprayed as our metal grated together, locked in a classic display of stubbornness where neither of us felt like moving an inch. She hollered for us to keep going, whirling her spear into a massive scarlet cyclone of energy. It was not magic, just high-level technique that was frankly terrifying. Vaulting into the sky, her silhouette resembled a winged demon against the daylight. She announced her sacred lance attack, and I knew the ground was about to vanish. With a thunderous crash, she drove the polearm down with her signature move, causing a massive eruption of gravel. If I stayed still, I was definitely becoming a rug. The proctors observed from their wooded vantage point, absolutely captivated by the spectacle unfolding before them. It seemed this exam had inexplicably devolved into a genuine monster brawl, catching even them off guard. The proctor remarked that he hadn't seen the Duhan family's specialized spear techniques performed live for years. He declared Faye an undeniable genius, utterly blown away by her flawless execution of speed and power. The proctors exchanged glances, one reluctantly conceding that the commoner kid was also quite impressive. He quickly followed up with a burning question of how much longer I'd last, predicting my impending and humiliating defeat. Turning to Principal Smith, they demanded his prediction on who would emerge victorious. Smith simply stood there with his arms crossed, peering utterly unfazed by the swirling vortex of destruction around him. Smith's response proved to be quite unexpected. He stated he actually quite liked me, but remained convinced I couldn't possibly defeat Faye, having personally witnessed the genuine capabilities of the great families. He clarified that while battle is certainly a struggle of will and raw strength, the vast gulf in technique and fundamental training isn't always something talent alone can overcome. He kept a very watchful eye on me, regardless. When the dust finally cleared, I was revealed to be completely unscathed, holding a perfect defensive stance. I'd somehow survived the devastating slam, but Faye instantly pressed her attack, denying me any chance to recover. Faye initiated another charge, maintaining a low profile close to the ground. She was preparing to unleash a second sacred lance technique, her spear now pulsing with a familiar, intense red aura. She launched a rapid succession of thrusts, transforming her spear into a dazzling blur of red energy trails. I found myself cornered, forced onto the complete defensive, struggling to deflect the overwhelming barrage. Faye visibly bristled with frustration, gritting her teeth and muttering curses because I was somehow still on my feet. I was turning out to be significantly more elusive and difficult to strike than she'd originally anticipated. My eyes ignited with blue energy as I detected a momentary opening within her rapid flurry. My highly analytical brain finally managed to pinpoint the underlying rhythm of her attacks. I observed Faye's hand tightening its grip on the spear, indicating she was about to completely shift her rhythm, which meant things were about to get even more serious. She had no idea what I was preparing next. I swung my sword horizontally, meeting the spear shaft with a deafening clang. My goal was to completely disrupt her momentum and seize control of the ongoing exchange. In an absolutely bonkers maneuver, I actually used my forearm to parry the main shaft of the spear. That was truly some next level, incredibly foolish martial arts right there. Please don't attempt this at home. Faye let out an angry sound as her strike was deflected yet again. She simply couldn't comprehend how a commoner like me was reading her signature maneuvers with such startling precision. I had executed a powerful leap backward, maintaining unblinking eye contact with Faye as I put significant distance between us. I was well aware that lingering in close proximity to a spear user was a surefire recipe for disaster. I landed gracefully on my feet, my sword poised and ready. I remained completely composed, cool as a cucumber, which must have been utterly infuriating for a proud noble prodigy like Faye. Faye slightly lowered her spear, reluctantly conceding that even the Oranka young master couldn't execute a defense like mine. She was finally acknowledging that I was operating in a different league entirely. I merely shrugged, informing her that it wasn't particularly difficult if you simply observed with proper attention. Talk about the absolute pinnacle of elite, nonchalant humble bragging. Faye flared her oar again, her spear now wreathed in intense orange flames. She let out a fierce scream, challenging me to deal with this, preparing to unleash her most powerful technique yet. She swung the spear in a massive arc, causing a shower of sparks when it violently collided with my sword. The sheer intensity of this battle felt like it was literally setting the surrounding air ablaze. With a fierce shout of sacred lance, crescent fall, Faye brought the spear down in a devastating vertical chop. It felt exactly like a guillotine descending from above, aimed directly at my head. My mind accelerated rapidly, meticulously analyzing every aspect of spear techniques, including thrusts, sweeps, defense, and suppression tactics. I was systematically breaking down her entire fighting style in real time. I concluded that her immense skill, combined with the spear's inherent reach advantage, made finding an entry point quite difficult. However, difficult does not equate to impossible in my vocabulary. The battle transformed into a beautiful yet lethal dance, painted with contrasting streaks of red and blue ore. Every slash and thrust was precisely aimed at a vital point, with both of us moving at speeds that defied all logical explanation. I skillfully weaved my way through her attacks, observing that despite its overwhelming power, her style possessed several critical weaknesses. I considered myself a scholar of martial arts, and I was about to prove my knowledge. Faye gathered her energy into a protective bubble, her aura vibrating intensely with stored power. She was preparing for a powerful counter thrust, but I had already calculated my response and was one step ahead. I loudly announced that her vulnerability in close quarters was a major weakness, charging inside her reach and closing the distance before she could fully reset her stance. I explained this was precisely where a spear user is weakest. My eyes began crackling with blue electricity as I prepared my decisive counter maneuver. I knew that if I executed this perfectly, the entire fight would conclude in an instant. I roared that I was counterattacking with my swordsmanship, initiating the sword dance, unleashing a rapid fire series of blue slashes and transforming my defense into a devastating offensive flurry. I hammered away at her aura, the satisfying blue surge crashing into her red defense. I was actually forcing the Grandmaster's offspring to retreat, a tactical victory that felt significant, and this decision would soon flip the entire fight on its head. Faye smirked confidently, letting me know she had already figured out my entire battle plan. The moment she opened her mouth with "but," I'd instantly realized I was about to receive a nasty surprise, probably involving pain. With astonishing ease, she parried my intricate sword dance using merely the shaft of her spear. She yelled out that I couldn't pull the trick on her, proving that her defensive capabilities were equally as elite as her striking power. Her footwork was genuinely phenomenal. Faye executed a high-speed pivot maneuver, her armor clanking like a mechanical clockwork toy as she prepared to shift her weight for a massive counterattack. She twirled her spear, creating a localized red cyclone that unleashed wind pressure powerful enough to literally shove me back. I was absolutely floored, realizing the Durhan family lance truly lacked any obvious weaknesses. I found myself trapped in the turbulence, my hair flying like a confused bird as I stared at the swirling cyclone. It was becoming clear why Faye had earned her reputation as a fighting monster. Her technique covered every potential vulnerability. Faye let out a powerful roar, shouting my name, Louis Carroll, and telling me to prepare myself. Her face was practically glowing with the fire of combat, indicating she was launching her full knockout strike immediately. A colossal eruption of orange energy shot forth from the clearing's epicenter. The sheer power was immense, creating a spectacle that looked exactly like a small star had just exploded directly onto the stage. The proctors were overheard commenting that even a fully fledged Grandmaster typically only learns this technique by age 16. Seeing Faye execute it now meant truly remarkable talent, and they immediately declared the match unfortunate for me. But I wasn't about to give up that easily. I gritted my teeth firmly and shouted the name of my defensive move, the technique called swordsmanship. Swordmit, I declared, spinning my training sword at phenomenal speed to generate a blue barrier of pure steel around me, completely blocking the incoming fire attack. I held my position firmly, my blades deflecting the incoming flames with shocking force. I made a mental note that this technique's main weakness was significant stamina consumption, so I planned to simply outlast her and wear her down. Our weapons met with another clang, sending bright sparks flying and momentarily illuminating our determined expressions. I remained convinced that if I kept defending precisely, the viable opening would definitely present itself. Faye maintained constant pressure, keeping her red cyclone spinning violently around her. She seemed absolutely determined to shatter my swordnet before her own stamina reserves finally ran dry. My targeting eye pattern illuminated again. Focusing intensely, I meticulously scanned the cyclone for the smallest glitch in her rotation, searching for that one tiny gap I needed to exploit. I found the opening and immediately lunged forward, launching a sudden, explosive thrust. I had placed everything on the line, betting everything I had on this single, desperate strike. With a shocking shattering sound, the simple wooden training sword I was wielding completely failed under the intense pressure and broke into a dozen fragments. This was a catastrophic failure of equipment. The broken tip of my blade spiraled slowly downward, making a soft clatter on the ground. I was left standing there empty, handed against the Grandmaster's offspring. But Faye, surprisingly, had a completely different plan. I stood frozen for a split second, staring wide-eyed at my now useless weapon. I had been so incredibly close to landing the decisive counter blow, but my lower quality equipment had spectacularly betrayed me. Faye abruptly halted her attack, her red eyes fixed intensely on mine. The sudden silence in the clearing felt incredibly heavy as both of us took a moment to recover our breath. She admitted I was impressive, giving me credit for my skill level. She recognized that had my sword remained intact, my counterattack would have landed perfectly on target. I let out a deep sigh, looking completely dejected. I commented that my luck was pretty terrible, which was arguably the most relatable thing I had confessed all day. We shared a cute chibai moment where Faye scolded me for holding back in the fight. I quickly apologized, explaining it was simply my habit to observe my opponents carefully before finally going all out. But then the atmosphere suddenly shifted dramatically. I put on a scary, shadowed look and whispered, "Now I suppose I'll get serious as well." Though things were definitely about to escalate. Faye looked completely skeptical, immediately pointing out that my weapon was already broken into pieces. She clearly thought I was defenseless, but she didn't know me well enough to realize her mistake. I waved my empty hand in a dismissive gesture, looking completely unfazed by the sudden lack of her weapon. I was radiating the classic I don't need a weapon energy, which usually precedes an impressive fight scene. I stepped forward and immediately dropped into a perfect martial arts stance, my blue aura flaring intensely around my feet. I declared that I was actually better with my bare fists, confirming that I was literally built differently. We locked eyes in an intense stare, downs, searching for any potential openings. The tension in the air grew so thick that you could have sliced right through it with a knife, or even the remains of my broken training sword. Faye gripped her weapon tighter, her eyes glowing fiercely with determination. She believed the time for a final engagement was now. Launching herself forward for the deciding strike, she stomped her boot forcefully into the ground, unleashing a wave of red shockwaves. She was specifically attempting to utilize the environment to completely disrupt my balance before she landed her final strike. Faye launched herself like a human tornado, her spear morphing into a flaming red drill of pure energy. It seemed like a move specifically designed to punch a hole straight through a building, let alone a person. I stood completely still on the ground, pulling my fist back as the inferno drill rapidly closed in. I absolutely wasn't planning on dodging. This was going to be a face meeting with a spinning weapon. Kane was yelling from the sidelines like a panicked chicken, warning me that taking this technique head-on would turn me into a human pinction. He looked absolutely terrified for me, but his advice was falling on deaf ears. I collected a huge amount of bright blue energy into my open hands, causing the air to crackle loudly with electricity. I was preparing a high-level arcane move specifically to catch a lance charge, which everyone watching would find truly hard to believe. The camera zoomed in tight on the red spinning energy about to make contact with my palms. This moment, ladies and gentlemen, was the very definition of our high-stakes encounter. With a resounding clap, I managed to actually catch the spinning spear tip right between my bare hands, causing the blue and red energies to explode outward. I had just successfully stopped her ultimate charge with nothing more than my open palms. I let out a guttural roar as I forced the spear backward, my aura bursting into a pillar of blinding blue light. This particular display of strength definitely belonged in a legend. Kane's face was a masterpiece of total disbelief. He had just witnessed a common street kid completely nullify a great family's ultimate technique using only his bare hands. Faye was absolutely drenched in sweat, her expression a mask of pure shock as she screamed that this was physically impossible. Her entire worldview had just been shattered by a kid from a simple orphanage. It must have looked absolutely epic, seeing me standing completely firm, holding the flaming spear tip as bolts of lightning arced through the surrounding air. I had officially leveled up from human to absolute beast. Up in the observation deck, the high-ranking proctors were completely losing their minds. They were openly questioning how a mere commoner could possess such incredibly high-level defensive techniques. Faye wasn't giving up quite that easily. However, she crouched low, her red aura flaring up brightly as she screamed that she wasn't finished yet, that noble warrior pride was definitely kicking in. She launched herself directly at me like a guided missile set on maximum destructive power. Faye was risking everything on a single-point breakthrough, her eyes wide with a combination of desperation and intense concentration. Faye spun her spear in a massive horizontal arc that kicked up a huge cloud of dust. I managed to barely dodge the strike, feeling the blade whistle past my chest as I kept my composure. My eyes narrowed in complete focus, tracking every single tiny vibration in the air as I prepared myself for whatever crazy new move Faye was about to pull next. Faye's movement speed had reached truly ridiculous levels, creating multiple afterimages of herself all around me. It was like I was suddenly being attacked by 5 separate people instead of just one single individual. The red energy surrounding Faye's spear began to spin violently, creating a truly lethal whirlwind. She was trying to trap me inside a cage of high-speed strikes that left absolutely zero room for escape. The massive vortex of spear thrust enveloped me, resembling a beautiful yet terrifying flower of death in bloom. It was quite a display of the Durhan family's supposedly secret techniques. I just let out a calm little huff with a small, confident smirk. I was treating this supposedly elite noble technique like it was just another Tuesday afternoon, which had to be utterly infuriating for Faye. I yelled out, "So what?" and instantly leaped into action, my body becoming a blur as I used my very specialized footwork. It honestly looked like I had suddenly grown 10 extra arms just to parry every single spear thrust coming my direction. In a split-second close of chest, my hand was seen perfectly tracking the spear's movement without a hitch. I wasn't even using a weapon. I was taking on a legendary lance with nothing but my bare hands. With a loud, resonating clap, I successfully caught the spinning spear tip right between my palms once more. The blue energy from my martial arts clashed violently against Faye's red aura, and neither side was willing to give ground. Sparks flew everywhere as I held the line against the incredible rotational force. My physical strength was clearly absolutely off the charts for someone who was supposedly my age. Faye's eyes were practically bulging out of her head as she screamed in pure disbelief. She simply couldn't believe her family's ultimate spinning technique had just been stopped by a pair of bare hands. She had no idea what was coming next. Principal Smith watched with intense concentration, his expression completely unreadable as he made a note. He observed that I seemed to be stopping the spear's rotation using a very specific and high-level martial technique. The proctors were absolutely stunned, with one admitting that he had never seen a technique quite like this before. I was a constant surprise, proving that commoners could possess tricks that even the elite didn't know about. My eyes glowed with an eerie blue light as I prepared to launch my counterattack. I was about to show Faye that catching the spear was truly just the beginning of her ongoing problems. With a massive boom, a powerful shockwave erupted between us as I unleashed all my pent-up energy. The impact was strong enough to blow us both backward, creating a literal crater in the ground beneath our feet. Faye skidded across the grassy field, using her spear to desperately maintain her balance. She was panting heavily, her previous overconfidence completely gone as she stared at me with pure disbelief. She demanded to know what on earth that strange technique was. She had never seen anyone manipulate force and rotation quite like that, especially someone who wasn't even a ranked mage. I smoothly chirped that my method involved a fancy little dodge that perfectly mimicked the spear's trajectory, thereby completely nullifying its wild spinning energy. Truly a stroke of pure genius, wouldn't you say? Poor Faye looked utterly confused, as if hieroglyphics were being spoken. She was utterly drowning in the meaning of words like deflection and spin, experiencing what looked like a minor systems crash over the battle mechanics. I quickly told her just to accept it as a thing that happens, not pausing for her brain to catch up. Then I zipped in lower, my leading hand already wound up for a knockout punch. Faye barely managed a tiny squeak before I shrank the distance in a flash. Suddenly she was entirely stuck playing defense, that long pole weapon now just a cumbersome nuisance up close. My velocity made me nothing more than a shimmering streak against the scenery. I was absolutely maximizing the gap I'd opened and had zero intention of pumping the brakes. Faye tried to sweep her spear low to create breathing room, but I simply bounded over it as if it were a misplaced garden hose. My hops were so spectacular they looked like I was playing Ring Around the Rosie with Doom. I dipped beneath another overhead hack, the sharp point sailing past my scalp by a whisker, maintaining a cool, almost musical momentum that made every evasion look like a planned ballet move. Faye was clearly starting to sweat, her wild swings now less precise and more like an angry windmill, while I danced right inside her forgotten zones, making her fight a phantom, and the fun was just warming up. I deployed my phantom selves again to mess with her perception, tipping around Faye like a dizzy honeybee. She was whirling around trying to pinpoint the real me, but I was always one witty step ahead of the game. Young Kane watched from the sidelines with his mouth permanently agape, wondering if his eyeballs were playing tricks. He couldn't follow my speedy footwork at all. I pictured my intricate foot movements, complete with ethereal, fluttering winged things surrounding me. It's a legendary, graceful dance that lets me instantly relocate without getting snagged. Faye snarled that I was mockingly close, throwing a desperate, clumsy jab, having momentarily forgotten her fancy stick just to try and land any kind of solid wallop on me. I casually sidestepped her clumsy fist, looking frankly bored, thinking to myself that this butterfly skip technique was the ultimate anti-frustration measure, keeping me in touch while Faye exhausted her reserves. Faye shrieked with pure exasperation, demanding to know why I was untouchable, throwing everything she had, yet I was simply waltzing around her as if she were fighting underwater. My boots barely kissed the earth as I moved, maintaining a tempo that was scientifically impossible for Faye to ever lock onto. This was simply the pinnacle of practice skill demonstration. I abruptly raised the intervening space, materializing right inside Faye's bubble. Knowing this exact second was the jackpot, the perfect opportunity to declare this whole sparring match officially over. My palm connected squarely with the center of Faye's chest plate, a massive pressure wave bursting outward, accompanied by a deep, resonant thud echoing across the grassy field. Faye made a horrible, stifled noise as all the air was forcibly evicted from her core, her body levitating momentarily from the sheer force of my contact, her spear tumbling loudly to the dirt. Kane was practically vibrating with stress, utterly silent. He couldn't believe I'd just smacked Faye in the next week, finally recognizing the sheer, ridiculous canyon separating our skill levels. Even the ever-serious Principal Smith looked slightly surprised, admitting this result was completely off the charts. Staring hard at the silver-haired kid who had just laid out a noble champion, Smith pointed out that even without summoning any supernatural fizz, few fighters can genuinely overpower Faye Durhan in a stand. The brawl, he was beginning to suspect I was more of an anomaly than he first guessed. I loomed over Faye as she struggled to recover, the wind gently tousling my hair. I probably looked every bit the unstoppable fighter, while the master of close quarters combat lay humbled, though destiny often has a second chapter written. But the Durhan wasn't done. She clenched her jaw, her eyes blazing with a sudden, almost manic intensity, proclaiming loudly she has not beaten yet. The Durhan family pride is a potent substance, right? I just observed her struggling assent, my face snapping back to that icy, analytical mask, ready for the inevitable sequel. And I promised myself zero mercy this time around. Faye slammed her foot down with such force that the turf cracked visible beneath her heel. She was hoarding every last ounce of her remaining vitality for one final, desperate lunge. She ditched the lawn pole weapon and rushed forward, her fists radiating angry crimson light. Faye yelled that she absolutely refuses to go down so easily, her personal energy flaring up like a beacon. I felt a genuine flicker of interest, wondering if she'd switch to a spear, mimicking pugilistic style. I was mentally cross, referencing her new approach in real time. Forever the analyzing combat student, Faye shot forward with a punch that looked exactly like a spear jab, hollering for me to take this, moving with far greater swiftness and might than she ever displayed with her actual weapon. I settled into a classic, flowing defensive posture, my hands moving in a controlled, weaving pattern. I was countering her brute force with ancient, finely tuned motion specifically designed for this. I employed a move called the Pakso, flap defense to redirect her strike, my hands working in a barely perceptible blur, channeling her immense power away with minimal input, making her charge low cuddly foolish. Having hollowed loudly, the girl threw her strongest smash, emitting an enormous ruby eruption that might collapse an apartment, as she bet her entire being upon that solitary hit. My knuckles greeted hers with enthusiasm, sparking a tectonic explosion that rocked the earth, and sending out a ripple so fierce the nearby trees simply vanished into thin air. Contemplating the collision, I observed how her vidder mirrored that short-range explosive force, which made me quite a fan of her style despite the minor detail of her trying to end my subscription to life. Both fighters backed away while huffing like broken vacuum cleaners, and I offered a polite chin tilt, acknowledging that her brawling skills were definitely not a comedy routine. Not finished yet, she shrieked regarding her third pulverizing technique and rushed forward, delivering a non-stop flurry of strikes that resembled a rain of space rocks targeting my face. I challenged the woman to approach and adopted a classic pugilist pose, summoning a massive emerald ghost fighter to shadow every motion, signaling that the actual party was finally starting. Our hands traded rapid greetings at warp speed, while our glowing oars smacked together with noisy thuds, marking the most frantic rhythmic dance of the whole testing session. A smirk crept onto my features as I remarked how this matched my fantasies, battling a sturdy foe until satisfied, since I finally discovered a person who could actually test my limits. The violence escalated as both participants yelled for an extra serving of mayhem. The ambient power between us started acting extremely jittery, an erratic blend including ruby along with cobalt luminosity causing eyes to suffer, right when the circumstances took a total detour. My internal excitement surged, revealing a shimmering ruby organ that proved my warrior spirit was working overtime, and accessing a hidden vault of strength I had kept tucked away. My pupils radiated a creepy scarlet bullseye design, indicating I was sinking into a primal fury where logic retired, while my aura felt like a nightmare come to life. An enormous, black fiendish silhouette burst forth from my body, looming high above the surrounding woodland. I bellowed a request for further amusement, as my surrounding glow shifted from a chilly sapphire to a sinister, murky inferno shade. Face stood frozen like a statue of terror, gasping at the beast I transformed into, her once bright enthusiasm getting totally extinguished by my murderous intent. The hellish fog around me wailed, a spine-chilling shout bouncing off the trees, which showed I was no longer just some kid, but a natural disaster ready to finish the match. Absolute horror was visible in Faye's gaze, as she understood far too late the mistake of annoying a napping wyvern, and now her exit strategy was non-existent. I threw a haymaker that seemed to possess beastly talons, while Faye remained motionless, her inner voice screaming about her stubborn limbs refusing to budge as the blow landed. Following a giant bang, Faye got launched into the distance, her frame bouncing along the dirt like a flat pebble on water, and I ended the fight with maximum carnage. The headmaster noticed the vibe change, whispering questions to himself with a shaky eyelid because he knew my newfound energy was definitely not on the school curriculum. A huge gap now stood between Faye and myself in the thickets, and the quiet following that blast felt incredibly loud. As debris drifted lazily back to the earth, Faye remained slumped in the dirt, hacking and barely able to raise her chin, having been totally wrecked in both her anatomy and psyche by our final clash. The pair of spectators peeked from the shrubbery, peering as if they had encountered a phantom, as they watched a high-born aristocrat get dismantled by a complete random. A rich kid hissed in annoyance that a peasant actually trapped Faye, the skin turning ghostly and damp as he understood that numbers matter little when fighting a freak like me. Brian, the fancy onlooker, began twitching uncontrollably, as the leftover vibes I emitted were so intense they were basically frying his brain just by proximity. Brian lost his lunch on the grass while hugging a trunk for stability, and though his pal questioned him, he was too mentally fried to reply. Since our difference in strength was genuinely nauseating, he stuttered that he had no clue, only feeling unwell, as he tasted raw, basic dread for the very first time, which was totally crushing his spirit. I lingered within a zone of hellish radiance, peering like a king of shadows, while Brian speculated if this feeling was the start of something big, since the true adventure was just commencing. Meanwhile, among the fancy tents, Chief S minions were having a complete meltdown, screaming about how their scheme flopped because they underestimated the peasant. Their sneaky trap was basically a dumpster fire. The blue-blooded guy wiped a red smear off his face while wearing a creepy expression, whispering that if the old stories are real, my punching skills are the least of their worries. The sidekicks decided that my expiration date had arrived, their vibes shifting from playground bullies to actual headmen. The casual school rivalry had officially mutated into a genuine murder plot. We returned to Faye eating dirt and staring up in absolute dread. She was seeing things that defied logic, her spicy attitude getting totally extinguished by the spooky shadows looming overhead. A huge explosion of crimson power popped off as my evil twin mode attacked. The sheer brutality was way too much for a school kid, and Faye was sitting in the front row. Faye took a direct hit to the face and went flying like a ragdoll while hacking up some red liquid. Looking completely traumatized, the supposedly unbeatable genius was basically a chew toy now. I floated down from the clouds like a goth angel with laser vision focused on my target, while Faye performed some involuntary mid-air gymnastics without any grace or control. I screamed like a hungry caveman while a spooky red mist wrapped around my body. My brain had officially left the building, leaving behind a monster ready to remodel the entire woodland. Giant towers of edgy magic shot out of the dirt when I went full throttle, showcasing enough destruction to make the rest of the applicants look like toddlers in a sandbox. Faye was wobbling around with her gear in pieces and her limbs giving up on life. She finally grasped that she was cooked, acknowledging the scary truth of my actual power levels. A massive crimson glove of spooky energy hovered over her like a demonic slap. I was preparing to hand out a permanent nap that would definitely delete any regular human being. The girl stared at the approaching doom with dinner-plate eyes, thinking that her time was up, though the howling wind from my power drowned out whatever she tried to say. Faye was panicking inside her head, realizing that some random poor kid was about to finish her off. The murderous vibes I was radiating were far scarier than any horror movie. Panicking for her life, Faye yelled for her martial arcane power, abandoning her self-imposed restrictions to avoid dying. And the following events were straight out of a weird dream. She threw a ginormous flaming punch that sent a fire pillar toward the stars, hoping to shove me away. It was her final attempt to act like she was still the boss. Our powers smashed together in a total mess, creating a swirl of gold and red energy that trashed the field. The dirt was basically turning into lava from her sweaty panic. A giant boom rocked the place and Faye went sailing with a whimper as the dust settled. Apparently her secret special move was about as effective as a wet paper towel. She mowed down several plants before making a fresh hole in the soil. The collision was so violent that her fancy suit of armor sounded like a crushed soda can. I touched down like a pro, wearing a coat of swirling dirt and rocks, looking totally bored with the situation, which was definitely the most unsettling thing about our little scuffle. I looked at my palms with wide eyes while panting, whispering to myself about my weird behavior, feeling the spooky monster energy fade away as I stopped being a psycho. I was literally steaming while my vibe returned to normal, thinking that magic is actually pretty wild, finally understanding what kind of cheat codes I was dealing with out there. Kane ran up looking like he just saw a ghost and asked if I was okay. I assured him I was cool but kept staring at the face-shaped hole nearby. Out of the blue, an exam official popped up and loomed over me, announcing in a robotic voice that since my badge got fried, I was getting the boot. Some fancy kid pointed a finger and screamed about me being out. They were having the time of their lives seeing the poor guy lose because of her silly rule. I checked my shoulder where my pin once lived and found only crispy scraps, taking in the situation without looking like I was about to cry like a normal person. The camera zoomed in on my badge getting roasted by some leftover magic fire. It was totally charcoal, which meant my test adventure was officially over according to the handbook. Kane started yelling at the refs, claiming it was just an oopsie and they should chill, but the rich kids were already popping bottles, telling him that losing is losing. The posh beau guy grinned, blaming Kane for assisting a peasant in cheating. He was really pushing the whole rich versus poor narrative to remind me of my place. The snooty brat kept bragging while we sat on the dirt, sneering that garbage like me should just vanish, convinced that he had finally secured a victory for his ego. Out of nowhere, a shout broke the mood. Faye was standing up again with a bloody chin and a stern face, telling everyone to wait, and this twist flipped the script. That snobbish elite and Kane spun around like confused tops, stunned that Faye actually stepped in, though she looked like she just crawled out of a blender. Her vibe remained boss level, casting a blank glance behind me. I met her gaze. Faye then leaned in to ask in a quiet voice if my limbs were still attached, showing a rare flicker of real concern. Faye marched forward while her gear literally sizzled from the heat, leaving the official and those fancy pants rich kids scratching their heads about her sudden meddling in my business. The head jerk gave her a death stare, questioning her choice to shield a peasant, then threatened that she might get booted from the trials for playing hero against the regulations. Faye basically told him to shove it using only her terrifying eyes, acknowledging that my badge was toast but insisting that this plot twist wasn't the finale she had in mind. In a total glitch in the matrix, the legendary Faye Durhan actually offered a formal apology for losing her cool and blasting me with Marner, leaving Kane looking like a fish out of water. Acting like it was no biggie, she told me to shake it off, then demanded a rematch once we both made the cut, proving she has the heart of a hungry gladiator. The lead snob just scoffed and waved his hands like he was shooing a fly, pointing out that our measly 4 tokens wouldn't even buy a snack, let alone get us admitted. Keeping her lips sealed, she flashed a smug grin and slowly unfurled a hidden stash, proving she had been doing some serious heavy lifting while everyone else was busy talking trash. She tossed a hefty mountain of badges my way, labeling it a prize for my victory, which honestly caught me off guard since she was basically handing me a golden ticket. Staring at the 10 shiny tokens now in my palm, I realized this all put me right in the elite tier, thanks to Faye doing me the most massive favor in history. Faye shot the furious brat a cheeky look, asking if that balanced the books, while he vibrated like a broken washing machine and shrieked her name because his scheme totally tanked, calling Kane a handsome lad, which clearly annoyed him. She began to lay out the logic behind her choice to save my skin while we both stood there and soaked it in. Glancing at her snap wooden blade, she announced that she hates seeing losers succeed while talent rots, proving that despite her fancy bloodline, her own agenda prioritized strength over tradition. Launching her busted weapon into the sky with a swift boot, she immediately stopped moping about the defeat and started hunting for the next victim to pulverize in the woods. She snatched the wood with a grin. Kane remained on edge, wondering if my 10 tokens would be enough if some other overachiever hoarded even more of the shiny things. Unsheathing his blade with a wicked smile, Kane noted the funny timing because he was on the same wavelength, marking the first time he and Faye actually agreed on something. Both of them dropped into a pounce, Faye hollering to get a move on, and they zipped into the trees like rockets, leaving me behind to finally stop wheezing like an old man. Left in the sudden silence as my crew vanished, I realized the tranquility was a total lie because some creepy lurker was definitely eyeing me from the darkness of the foliage. Some official suit approached and formally kicked me out since my badge was missing, offering a ride home, to which I just gave a weary nod and a simple acknowledgement, following the judge with my chin on my chest. I didn't see the rich jerks lurking in the shrubbery, wearing evil smirks and muttering that the party was just getting started. The sidekick was absolutely fuming, hands balled up into tight knots, as he hissed that my face was the last thing he ever wanted to look at after his pride got wrecked. Chiefs, the boss jerk, had a scary look in his eyes while hinting that her sudden tragic fatality during the test would be viewed as just another Tuesday by the administration. The minions were totally down for the plan, hyping him up and praying I wasn't some fragile flower, as they plotted to turn me into a ghost once the sun went down. Yellow orbs flickered within a hellish shadow, revealing the source of that earlier spooky vibe, because Louis Carroll turns out to be way more terrifying than your average neighborhood peasant boy. The big boss Smith strolled through the halls, musing that while punching things is cool, it can beat wizardry, basically hinting that I needed to level up my supernatural mojo soon. Looking at the tall school towers as the sun dipped, I fantasized about blending spells with fistfights to become an absolute wrecking ball that nobody in this realm could ever stop. Skipping to the witching hour, I was trekking through the pitch black woods, my shoes making wet noises in the mud while I appeared to be just another guy heading home. Eyeing my shredded rags with a deep sigh, I realized explaining this mess to my mother was way scarier than the lethal test, but then the whole vibe shifted instantly. Panic set in as I pictured Mom's face, fearing her interrogation more than death, because even a hellish fighting prodigy is just a regular kid who fears a grounded weekend. Out of nowhere, the ninja wannabe tried to pounce on me. Talk about a rough time. My gut gave me a violent wake. I called the second the trap was sprung. The palm squeezed a blade handle, pulling it out with a metallic screech. That unsheathing skill was actually pretty slick. It seemed I was dealing with some legit paid experts here. Following a loud bang, the giant wave of energy sent me tumbling across the gravel. These hitmen were playing around, since they brought the big guns to finish me off early. The head goon skated backward, his peeper shining scarlet behind his face covering. He sounded stunned, wondering how a mere adolescent could possibly dodge a pro tier ambush like that. I brushed off some grime while keeping a stone cold expression. My reply was simple: your stinky blood scent is a total giveaway. My chill vibe was clearly creeping the thugs out. A trio of hooded jerks boxed me into a three-sided trap. The boss made fun of my karmas while they got ready to jump me all at once. I stayed put while the killers looped around me. These guys actually had some moves, so I decided to stop holding back, letting my Azure energy start buzzing with intensity. My focus locked onto a single person hanging back. The particular fellow looked like real trouble, making me realize this squad actually had some functioning brain cells for once. The steel blade swiped at my rear, but I danced around it without even trying. The thug screamed for the kid to pay attention, though he was only slicing the breeze. The main villain charged with a giant shiny saber, shouting that my noggin was about to go airborne. This was the big moment to see if I survived as the battle raged on. I probably looked like a total psychopath, what with the red juice leaking down my chin and those neon blue eyes staring into souls. My concentration was getting downright spooky. The goons pounced from all sides, but I floated through their sharp metal storm like a spooky phantom. It wasn't just simple dodging, because I was predicting their choices before they did. Now that is what I call a flex. I grabbed a sharp blade with nothing but my naked palms. Azure lightning flickered as I cancelled his offense without even trying hard. The certain him and ate a delicious mud pie when I buried him into the soil with a heavy thud. I was officially finished being a nice guy to these losers. I landed a supersonic boot to another dude, launching him into the distance with a loud boom. I was basically treating these supposedly elite killers like clumsy toddlers. The skirmish turned into a messy smear of action as I swept up the trash. I was sprinting so fast that the baddies had no clue where the next punch originated. The head hunter finally chirped, confessing that my senses were godlike and my skills were top shelf. They figured out way too late that their scouting report was actually spot on. I took a breather, staring at the boss with my messy mug. This torque of reports confused me, showing that this little party wasn't just some accidental meeting in the woods. The captain stood proud while a trio of archers formed a row behind him. He teased that while my punching was decent, he wondered how I would handle some sorcery. All at once, the shooters loosed 3 shiny emerald breeze bolts. They were hauling serious booty, clearly intending to nail me to the floor right where I was standing. I had to hunker down, tucking my limbs in to tank the mystical assault. A little grunt escaped me as the heavy force of the gale force magic slammed into me. The mystical bolts whizzed past and chewed giant chunks out of the nearby trunks. I bit my lip, annoyed that I was stuck dealing with these breezy projectiles once more. I inhaled deeply, figuring it was finally time to use a specialized lunge trick. Standing there blocking forever was a bad plan. And unfortunately, the situation was spiraling downward fast. I could sense my inner circuits glowing as I concentrated my hidden mojo. I was letting loose my tucked away powers to give my muscles and agility a massive shot of adrenaline. Wrapped in a bright sapphire glow, I shot forward like a fleshy rocket. I put every ounce of effort into my dash, hoping to finish the job before they reloaded. The killers tried to shoot another round, but I told them their effort was totally pathetic. I was already zipping around far too quickly for their crosshairs to track me. Those breezy bolts collided in mid-air, heading absolutely nothing but oxygen. I had fully disappeared from their vision before they could even finish blinking their eyes. A random Hammond looked completely confused, glancing around like a lost puppy. He stuttered about how quick I was, having no clue that I was currently breathing down his neck. Tihaver. I popped up right over the killer, resting my palm on his cranium to use him as a handy human stepping stone. I caught a glimpse of his pupils through the eye holes. Seeing the very second he realized he totally goofed, the guy was frozen solid with sheer, unadulterated fright. I'd introduced his skull to the pavement with a crunch that sounded like dry cereal, making that ninja retiree scream before his lifelong nap began. Two archer wannabes hurled neon lime glow sticks at my face, but I transformed into a smudge on the landscape, waltzing past their glowy tantrums. The big boss man began sweating through his mask, screeching for his minions to do something while his peril dwindled with every thud. I planted a heavy boot right on a masked goon's cranium, demonstrating that my compassion had been misplaced or perhaps never existed at all. One fellow took a high speed trip to the dirt floor after my punch, as I decided to treat the entire squad like dirty linoleum. I paused to breathe while static zapped my pores, realizing that burning through soul juice like a cheap battery was making my joints feel 80. My footwear plowed deep grooves into the mud as I slid, desperately seeking oxygen just as the main antagonist decided to stop being lazy. I squinted at the fashionable fellow in the azure neckwear, sensing he was way more problematic than his losers, unaware of the impending disaster. The head honcho stood with his limbs folded like a disappointed parent, exuding bad vibes while his scarf fluttered majestically in the breeze. Suddenly, the captain materialized behind my back with a whoosh, leading me staring into space and realizing I was slower than a snail. I found myself encircled once more by a bunch of afterimages were twin brothers, feeling like I had worked right into a blender. I ducked and dived through a storm of rapid emerald blades, finding that real estate for my feet was becoming an expensive luxury. Looking down, I was centered in a violent 5-point formation as they lunged inward, eager to turn my body into a decorative pink cushion. I kissed the gravel and slid, while the lug with the oversized mallet hovered over me, bragging about how I had finally collapsed. The Hauer bro hoisted his violet mallet and wondered if I was just some random peasant, failing to realize that monologuing is a death sentence. The situation escalated when my eyeballs started glowing plum with a bullseye, signaling that my inner demon was craving a very bloody snack. I snatched the thick timber shaft mid-swing with my palms, glaring at him with spooky pupils and pretending that my nerves were anti-screaming. I heaved the blunt object back toward his chest, surprising the killer as I seized the steering wheel of this chaotic disaster once more. I landed a punch so accurate it probably rearranged his spinal cord, leaving him looking like he just saw a ghost made of pain. I threw a finishing blow that painted the surroundings in a vibrant shade of crimson, proving that my playtime with these amateurs had expired. Like a caffeinated ghost in a strobe light, I tore through the survivors, leaving a trail of broken bodies and very confused spirits. The head killer stared at me resting in a red puddle, jokingly inquiring if I was napping before he decided to end my subscription. I rose from the heap of defeated goons while liquid red splattered around, looking like a swamp creature that had just missed its breakfast. The boss gave me a slow applause and complimented my youth, acting with a kind of creepy chillness found only in serial killers. I questioned his lack of empathy for his dead friends, but he just stepped forward, explaining that he treats his help like garbage. I skipped the small talk and charged the captain with my last bits of energy. Just as the universe decided to flip the script, the ninja slipped my attack and called me a clever boy, seemingly having the time of his life while I tried to die. He mentioned some mysterious boss ordered this hit while a giant grape-colored tornado engulfed him, indicating the tutorial phase was officially over. The commander unsheathed a huge violet mallet and mused about adopting me as a student, all while vibrating with enough energy to power a city. He dropped that hammer with enough force to delete the tectonic plate, leaving me stuck in the center of a very violent earthquake. The skyscraper-sized column of obsidian gloom blasted skyward while shrieking like a ravenous toddler. This frantic juice basically gave the local woodland a very aggressive and unrequested haircut. This body soared through the atmosphere resembling a floppy plush toy, emitting a pathetic squeak during an unplanned flight. It was officially the moment I realized my butter knife wasn't cutting it. These eyes witnessed my own frame bouncing off oak branches like a broken pinball, failing to stick any landing. The boss man really highlighted the embarrassing canyon between our skill levels. The contract slayer observed my talent top to begin though teased my survival against experts was impossible. He stood there sporting indigo eyes, peering as if he escaped a violet hellscape. Those terrifying indigo pupils flared with murderous intent during a dramatic zoom. The assailant mumbled that my efforts were adorable but insufficient while winding up for another round of glorious violence. His limbs swung a gigantic grape-colored plate of doom, triggering a boom that would make a rock concert seem quiet. The hit felt so spicy it seemed to be ripping reality's fabric. The second sky, I found enough sparkle and wood chips shook the entire valley. Honestly, working away from a smack like that seemed about as likely as winning the lottery without a ticket. The big meanie sprinted through the haze with his violet aura flapping like a majestic amber cape. The brute clearly didn't believe in taking a coffee break or showing an ounce of mercy. Additional earth, chattering thumps and vibrations rattled my very soul. The scrap was evolving into a high-speed disaster that our normal brain could barely even register, let alone survive. A colossal blanket of soot and smog swallowed the clearing once he stopped swinging. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet, making it seem like I was officially deleted from the map. The chief took a breather, panting while squinting into the gray fog. He grumbled about my annoying persistence, sensing that the sweet thud of a lethal hit hadn't actually occurred yet. The grime finally cleared to reveal a giant, broken hole in the dirt where I used to be. Every nearby tree had been turned into toothpicks by that excessive magical tantrum. The killer sounded shocked when he asked if I was still breathing. I stood amidst the trash looking like a burnt marshmallow, though the universe apparently wasn't done bowling my soul yet. My skin resembled a raspberry jam spill but remained upright nonetheless. Clinging to a wooden stick, I hissed that an expiration date wasn't today. Fueled by pure, stubborn spite, the commander's expression darkened while noting how unfortunate this concluding moment became. His arrogance evaporated as he focused entirely on executing a perfect finishing move. Hoisting his luminous indigo maul once more, the Slayer shouted how celestial beings couldn't prevent my demise. Those swirling vapors felt significantly more potent than his earlier displays. Recollections concerning a former incarnation plus those ancient tool investigations raced across my brain. I discovered a method for mixing physical strikes with mystic energy via hidden combat arts. The murderer dropped his tool of destruction, making the ground explode, but I had already vanished. I accessed some weird new vibes to wiggle out of a certain death situation. I tasted iron while leaking red, internally screaming that dying was simply not on my schedule. I forced tired limbs to ignore the laws of biology to keep dreams alive. I focused on my desire to be a wizard king and keep favorite people safe. Those warm fuzzy feelings acted like high-octane fuel for a sudden and dramatic power of visuals concerning a mother plus those orphanage rascals flickered by. I internally screamed regarding altering my future while terminating this depressing sequence of being discarded. These ocular spheres became intensely ruby while exhibiting a strange geometric mark. I swore regardless of any potential cost. Existing was my only priority. The giant, spinning ball of cherry-flavored lightning began wrapping around my frame. The loud rumbling suggested that something incredibly big was about to burst out of my lungs. The skyscraper-sized beam of ruby and pearl radiance blasted skyward as I let loose. The boss looked absolutely flabbergasted, yelping as a secondary gust knocked him backward. The boom was humongous, making the night look like noon and vaporizing the woods for leagues. This was definitely some premium strength that hadn't been mentioned in the brochure. My body slumped within that smoldering hollow while spitting crimson. Having gambled every ounce of stamina on a solitary blow, survival seemed unlikely as vision faded. The shrubbery kept toasting while I struggled for oxygen on the scorched earth. I looked like a total disaster zone. Yet miraculously, the lungs were still doing their job. The head slayer towered above me, still gripping his mallet with a puzzled expression. We silently confessed that seeing a shattered child pulled that off was extremely weird. That antagonist grasped how for one fleeting heartbeat. It seemed he battled a peer. His mindset finally shifted from viewing me as some gifted toddler to recognizing an actual hazard. The adversary stared toward my prone form while recognizing the hidden titan within. He grumbled how such immense talent explains why a specific individual wants my head. Then Higher Killer hoisted his mallet for the killing swing, screaming for my beastly demise while getting ready to delete me from existence, making it clear my luck had finally expired. Suddenly a colossal cyclone of airy sorcery burst forth, rotating with enough intensity to toss the disguised thub into the clouds, proving this wasn't some light draft but a janitorial gale for trash removal. I remained rooted in that open field while a different goon got snatched by the gusts, resembling a stray petal in a typhoon, as the combat intensity escalated far beyond reasonable limits instantly. The howling atmospheric enchantments persisted in their roar, flinging those murderers like discarded ragdolls in a display of wizardry so overwhelming it left every survivor frozen in absolute terror. A certain disguised henchman was perspiring enough to fill a lake, gaping at the tempest with shock, shouting his confusion as he understood his pay grade was nowhere near this level of chaos. A monstrous spiral of cyan radiance stabbed through the dark firmament, peering like a celestial beam from above, with the magnitude of this incantation sufficient to flatten every single tree nearby. Those breezes crashed down with a piercing crack, succeeded by a creepy tone resonating through the mess, as a voice announced the prologue had concluded and the true nightmare was starting. I stayed there amidst the settling debris, glancing upward with a dazed and crimson-stained expression, contemplating the source of that overwhelming flood of energy that had just manifested. When the grime settled it exposed none other than Headmaster Smith, who showed up in a luminous blink, appearing entirely composed yet radiating a level of might that was genuinely frightening. I was clutching onto consciousness, my pupils dilating upon spotting my rescuer, wheezing out the administrator's rank since the school's alpha male had actually arrived to rescue my sorry carcass. Smith remarked that I successfully stifled my inner frenzy for the moment, dropping a mysterious clue about my inner demons, before passing me a neon emerald brewer and ordering me to swallow. I wasted no time gulping the shimmering tonic while Smith observed with a keen, analytical stare, signaling that the student had piqued the curiosity of the most formidable wizard in town. At the same time the head him collapsed onto the soil with a dull crash, appearing like a heap of dirty clothes, which was quite a pathetic finish for a guy playing the ultimate villain earlier. The headmaster appeared truly enraged, his presence flickering as he towered over the fallen mercenaries, snarling about their audacity to probe his institution, and I sensed he would soon inflict massive regret upon them. He glared at the captain of the squad, requiring the identity of the person who funded this contract. Having abandoned all patience as he sought specific identities and demanded them immediately, the killer spat out red fluid while shaking on the turf, sarcastically addressing Smith as a supreme expert while cautioning that he could never shield that beastly entity for eternity. The principal's violet gaze tightened, causing the local climate to plummet instantly, since he has zero tolerance for sass, particularly when it comes from a bug he just crushed. A fiendish crimson face flickered in the distance, serving as a spooky memento of the creature the thug sighted, as the silhouette bellowed that the fun had barely started for us and promised major future drama. All at once a giant explosion of gore and spirit power occurred as the murderer met his end, with Smith watching passively, offering no pity to anybody endangering his pupils. Smith inspected the leftovers, pondering if this was a self-destruction or an organized hit from the local syndicate, acting like a magical investigator piecing together a complex puzzle. I regained my footing while radiating a gentle lime glow as the medicine kicked in, stunned by the velocity of the premium elixir that made me look refreshed instead of mangled. I squeezed my hands shut, verifying my vigor with a surprised face, thinking about how even my snapped skeleton felt brand new, showcasing the insane quality of gear the headmaster possesses. I eventually spoke to Smith, inquiring if his arrival was a random stroll or a deliberate plan, because I am smart enough to know that big shots never do anything accidentally. I peered at my benefactor, asking why he consistently acts as my guardian angel, though Smith only returned the look while maintaining his mysterious facade and saying nothing. Smith offered a cryptic response, mentioning he would explain everything at my residence, which caused me to panic internally at the horrifying prospect of the boss chatting with my mother. I descended into a total cartoonish meltdown, grabbing my scalp as I noted the late hour, fearing my parents' scolding significantly more than any attempt on my life. I bolted away instantly, shouting about the dire situation, abandoning the most influential wizard in the realm in a woodland area littered with the bodies of his enemies. Smith was unfazed by my departure, summoning Kylie to bring the janitorial squad for some much-needed tidyings, proving that high-ranking officials never handled their own trash removal. A gloomy serpentine phantom glided through the glade, methodically deleting every trace of the skirmish, which was a handy cleanup utility though the future looked even more troublesome. The perspective moved to Mantillo village beneath the stunning lunar glow, where everything appeared tranquil despite the inevitable conflict bubbling up at the neighborhood house for children. A bunch of stuck-up aristocrats were pestering my mom, the seller, with one buffoon demanding to know who authorized her to fix that strange millstone just so they could squeeze out more tax money. The main jerk got right in her face, calling her a fraud and promising a painful lesson, acting like a complete loser because he had the church backing his play. Suddenly, a foot appeared from thin air and met the noble's chin with a thunderous crack, providing a high-velocity impact that felt absolutely fantastic to deliver. Desu's back, I launched the snob across the plaza with a massive drop-kick while my mother stood there looking like she'd just seen a ghost. I landed in a perfect crouch as the jerk ate dirt, prompting the seller to scream my name in relief, though her joy was briefly hijacked by the brutal scene I'd just caused. Flipping the switch back to Mam's boy mode, I asked if she was hurt, radiating a protective energy that suggested you shouldn't touch my family or you will regret it. I kept my eyes locked on the noble like a predator, forcing the idiot to scramble back as he finally realized the child he'd been mocking was actually a human woodchipper. Looking at my state, Yahello gasped and asked what on earth happened, her motherly panic rising at the sight of my shredded, blood-stained clothes while I scrambled for a believable excuse. I spun a total yarn, telling her not to sweat it because I just got snagged on some branches during the test, while Smith's shiny boots began clicking closer. The noble started pointing and whining like a toddler, shouting that I was the same troublemaker who always breaks the law, proving the man has a death wish. He started rambling about telling the Lord and summoning some guy named Fighter George, basically begging me to relocate his teeth with another kick to the head. Right then, Principal Smith descended from the clouds like a very fancy pigeon, mentioning that her small misunderstanding had occurred, which nearly made the noble's heart stop. Smith stood beside me and introduced himself as Aronian, the head of Kandrir Arcanist Academy, effectively dropping a social atom bomb on these village-level jerks. The aristocrats began trembling like wet dogs, stuttering about him being a literal grandmaster since he was flying, their pride vanishing faster than free samples at a buffet, giving them a look that could freeze fire. Smith suggested they send his greetings to the Lord, basically telling them to disappear before he decided to get creative. Those bullies bowed so low they were practically eating grass, screaming their compliance as they fled in terror, proving that a max-level boss always wins against level 1 trolls. Softening his voice considerably, Smith addressed Yahello as my mother and asked for a private chat, signaling the start of a conversation that would flip our world upside down. We headed into the orphanage where Yahello offered him a chair, the room feeling heavy with the weight of upcoming revelations that would alter our future forever. Smith paused to check out the weird millstone those idiots were whining about, clearly baffled by a machine that worked on its own without a drop of marner. He scanned the room and realized the place was packed with oddities, seeing various contraptions and upgrades that ignored every rule of traditional magic he knew. The orphanage interior was a display of peak comfort, filled with clever furniture and tools I had recreated from my memories of a previous life to spice things up. While I was in the back squeezing some juice, Yahello explained that I built everything myself, admitting she had no clue where my brain finds these ideas despite her pride. She smiled brightly while saying life had become a breeze thanks to my work, pointing to a table of snacks, but Smith's expression was becoming intensely focused. With a worried glance, Yahello asked if I had been a menace during the exam, but Smith just chuckled and told her I'd actually performed way beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Smith stared at the floor while Marner danced around him, thinking about the raw talent before him and the world, shaking power hidden inside a random commoner kid. The scene shifted into an old legend about the dark days when monsters treated humans like snacks, until a lone genius arrived to drag everyone out of the shadows. This champion followed the goddess's path, and we saw him carving through a massive shadow beast with a sharp sound, creating a moment of pure epic history. Old drawing showed soldiers partying on a mountain of monster corpses for Liberation Day, the very victory that started the Saint calendar in our current era of peace. According to the Yahello books, this man is celebrated as the first hero, a legendary warrior who supposedly pulled humanity back from the brink of extinction. Yahello called him a savior of the world, but she mentioned that local campfire stories don't actually mention a specific hero who saved everyone quite like that. Principal Smith's face adopted an enigmatic cast as he leaned in, preparing to unleash a veritable bombshell. He asserted that no, the legendary champion would materialize in a completely different guise, on the cusp of divulging some highly classified intelligence. He then disclosed that the true hero was a fellow blessed with dark hair and shadowy eyes, a revelation that hit me like a ton of bricks, considering those were precisely my features beneath my cheap hair dye. Smith cautioned us that this monumental secret was privy only to the uppermost echelons of human civilization, essentially informing us we were unwitting participants in a perilous, veiled heritage, though destiny clearly had a twisted sense of humor. He gravely reiterated that only humanity's absolute top brass were in on this particular, terrifying secret. Echelons, he emphasized, exhaling deeply, as if the sheer gravitas of this information was physically squashing the room's former tranquil ambience. He explained that although this hero had gallantly rescued mankind, a fierce, untamed madness resided within his very soul. We then witnessed a chilling mental image of the hero, consumed by a bloodthirsty frenzy, screaming to utterly annihilate everyone in sight. A horrifying depiction of utter chaos and slaughter immediately ensued, clearly displaying the grim reality, the harrowing cost of the hero's catastrophic spiral into stark raving lunacy. He had tragically morphed into the very beast he was destined to obliterate. Due to this catastrophic rampage, he was systematically expunged from all historical records and restrained by mysterious, glowing crimson shackles. They didn't merely dispatch him, nor, they went the extra mile to guarantee the entire world erased all memory of his existence. I perceived a malevolent eye peering through a stark mask, perfectly embodying the internal insanity, quite like a wicked hex. This was the monumental weight I unknowingly shouldered, or rather dramatic inheritance. I gazed at my trembling hands, pondering if my recent outburst stemmed from that ancient influence, beginning to link my own burgeoning dark impulses with the tragic saga of the fallen champion. Cain Arenker was cited as a primary catalyst for why every nation now possessed a mandate to locate individuals with black hair and black eyes. They weren't seeking saviors, but rather existential threats to mercilessly eliminate. Smith bestowed a gentle, almost patronizing, pat upon my head, inquiring if I genuinely believed I could continue duping everyone with a simple splash of hair color, admitting he'd discerned the truth since day one. Yahello erupted into a torrent of indignant defense, tearfully proclaiming that dyeing my hair had been her brilliant brainstorm, imploring Smith not to harm me, insisting this child was genuinely a good boy as her eyes brimmed with anguish. I calmly placed a reassuring hand on my mother's shoulder, murmuring, "It's all right." I was astonishingly composed for someone who had just discovered he was public enemy number one. I logically concluded that if the principal had harbored murderous intent, he would have undoubtedly acted already. I simply knew Smith wouldn't bother visiting our residence just to carry out an execution. There had to be a far grander purpose. Smith offered a knowing smile, proclaiming me remarkably sagacious for a mere 13. Dear, bold, confessing he discerned the hallmarks of a burgeoning new hero because I had managed to reign in the internal chaos instead of being consumed by its fiery grasp. I found myself utterly dumbfounded, barely able to whisper about the supposed new hero, having never imagined that my perceived curse could actually be interpreted as something noble, even profoundly hopeful. Smith casually flicked a glossy red apple into the air, remarking that this world might appear serene, but beneath its tranquil facade, something sinister persistently lurks. He was utilizing a simple piece of fruit to elucidate some profoundly weighty philosophical concepts. They proceeded, stating that a colossal darkness perpetually shadows us, catching the apple effortlessly with one hand, before admitting that my actions today had utterly revolutionized his entire perspective. He elevated the apple against the moon's soft glow, softly murmuring that old legends were truly absurd, declaring his choice to wager on cold, hard reality and, unexpectedly, on me, rather than archaic scriptures and paralyzing fear. Smith stared intently into my very soul, proclaiming his desire to steer me towards the correct path for humanity's looming future. He was formally extending an offer to become both my mentor and guardian, and at the precise moment, everything irrevocably shifted. With a sudden, dramatic whoosh, Smith lobbed the apple back in my direction, a literal and profoundly symbolic passing of the torch, or in this particular instance, merely the healthy snack. I secured it firmly with both hands, contemplating its significance with a complex blend of wonder and newfound resolve, having just been presented with an opportunity for a life I once deemed utterly unattainable. Smith casually mentioned that, thanks to Faye and Kane, the vast majority of examinees had completely flunked the final assessment, sporting a smug expression that practically screamed he had orchestrated this exact outcome from the very beginning. He finally delivered the momentous news for which we had been eagerly anticipating. Put simply, I had passed. My mother and I remained utterly paralyzed in astonishment, at last hearing the pivotal words that would irrevocably alter our lives forever. Then arrived the golden ticket, the chance to get private tutoring at Kandriyar Arcanist Academy from the big boss himself, and having a grandmaster as a mentor is basically the ultimate infinite money glitch for your career. Jumping down on some fruit, I started acting a bit unhinged, finally showing I had some backbone by interrogating my fresh teacher about his shady underlying reasons for picking me. Smith gave me an intense look with his violet peeper, wordlessly swearing that he was ready to handle any chaos or trouble that might come knocking on our door later. Staring at my mangled snack while the moonlight hit my battered face, I realized I had picked my lane, meaning there was absolutely no U-turn available on this crazy fate highway. Smith loomed by the glass like a dramatic movie poster, wondering aloud about the future and dropping a spooky cliffhanger just as the intro wrapped up, making for one heck of a journey. The fellow orphan sibling completely lost his marbles upon hearing the gossip, since he found it impossible that the headmaster would deliver a VIP pass just for a guy like me. He began rattling off a massive bill for classes, office, and housing, which made me realize that being a talented genius is actually a very quick way to go completely broke. My brain suddenly replayed images of that mythic savior with the dark features, and I began speculating if I had some weird, spooky link to those ancient and mysterious history books. I recalled the head honcho patting my scalp and roasting me for my fake hair color, a scary sign that the strongest guy on campus has known my hidden truth since day one. Smith seemed terrifyingly villainous right then, his gaze shimmering with an icy violet glow, making me wonder if I should trust someone who radiates such a strong please die soon energy. We both strolled through the spooky woods after dark, and I was honestly stressed about why the boss let my mother eavesdrop, because her blood pressure definitely does not need that drama. I fired back with a look of pure offense, stating very loudly that my dear mother is never a weight around my neck, no matter what some arrogant folks might assume. Smith stood his ground, arguing that if people find out who I really am, my whole kin gets targeted, and he claimed a parent needs to grasp how heavy this mess is. The headmaster strolled away into a gust of air, tossing back a serious threat, saying that if I enjoyed breathing, I better level up my power levels at a record-breaking speed. I peered toward the horizon with fire in my gaze, admitting the old man had a point, as my daily routine was clearly about to become a giant, tangled web of nonsense. All of a sudden, tiny Lorna burst from the trees, hollering for me, which was a total mood shift compared to the depressing torque I just finished with the boss man. She pounced on me with a tackle, hug that almost sent me tumbling, but I grabbed her and smiled, knowing these quiet, happy times are worth more than any magic gold. Lorna began sobbing, pleading for me to stick around and hating the idea of her farewell. A truly emotional scene that proved the youngsters view me as their personal emotional support human. I flashed her my patented sibling grin, promising to visit every single holiday, and told her this charity house is my true base of operations even if my life is changing. We locked pinkies to finalize the contract under the lunar glow, and though the kid seemed slightly anxious, she decided to believe that I would not flake on our little deal. Shortly after, some other kid sprinted over with a hot update, saying a fancy servant for a rich family was standing at our front door and demanding to see my face. The big view revealed a ridiculously expensive wagon pulled by horses sitting outside our poor home, with a servant who looked like he spent his mornings polishing silver with silk. The man in the suit bowed low and passed me an official envelope, announcing he worked for the Urankar clan, which happens to be the family of my buddy Kane. Scanning the paper, I saw Kane personally invited me to chill, because apparently the rich kid wanted to bond and become besties before the school semesters began to ruin our lives. I gave a simple nod of agreement and trailed behind the servant toward the vehicle, effectively taking the first-class elevator straight to the world of people who eat with tiny forks. We arrived at Harzan, a city that is basically a monument to the Urankar family's bank account, looking incredibly huge and high-tech compared to the dusty village where I was raised. I marched through the house with my shoes tapping on expensive stone, realizing the foyer alone was probably larger than the entire building where all us orphans used to eat and sleep. The sheer scale of the Urankar estate blew my mind, since it was more of a fortress than a residence, highlighting the massive canyon between regular folks and those born with money. Kane bolted down the corridor waving like a maniac, obviously pumped that I showed up, and he seemed way less stressed out than when he was sweating bullets during the school trials. Kane slapped my back and chuckled about the total circus I created during our last exam, behaving as though we had been inseparable partners in crime since the literal dawn of time. Strolling through this palace, I modestly credited my victory to that boy and Faye, yet my companion rejected such nonsense immediately. He realized my solo prowess sufficed to crush those entrance tests without any assistance. My buddy was obsessed with our lack of a genuine duel throughout the testing phase, with a glint of rivalry in his eyes. He seemed itchy for a chance to finally trade blows with me. The rich kid demanded we throw hands repeatedly before the semester kicked off. He hopped around like a caffeinated rabbit, ignoring the staff members who were busy scrubbing floors and dusting fancy vases behind us. A weary groan escaped my lips because his golden retriever energy felt incredibly draining. This represented the quintessential standoff between a relaxed dude and some human energy drink. Everything became awkward once a grim lady manifested atop the grand staircase. My friend turned into a human popsicle, leaving me puzzled by the scary newcomer, though the situation was rapidly spiraling toward a total disaster. The woman was his mom, peering at us as if we were smelly garbage stuck to her expensive heels. Her icy stare possessed enough frostbite to halt a stampeding elephant right in its tracks. He attempted to present me as his pal, but his vocal cords were clearly malfunctioning from terror. He stumbled over his words like a broken record, whereas I maintained a perfectly icy composure. She silenced him immediately with a look of pure vitriol. Her face resembled a frozen lemon, radiating revulsion that a peasant like me had the audacity to breathe her high-quality mansion air. The guy appeared physically struck, his complexion turning the color of a fresh bedsheet. He had definitely never witnessed his biological creator in such a terrifying state of unbridled maternal fury. Screaming from her lofty perch, she questioned when their estate became a public park for riffraff. She articulated quite clearly that a peasant such as myself was light years away from being qualified for his social circle. Flicking a handheld prop, that lady glared toward us while scolding her boy that mingling with peasants was a tragic drain on his schedule. She demanded total focus on academic sorcery to honor his patriarch's dusty old goals. Approaching us, the rhythmic thumping of her shoes against the marble floor rang out like a funeral march. She was unleashing a verbal assault that would make a drill sergeant blush with shame. Standing tall, she interrogated me about my hidden agenda. She smirked, inquiring whether I craved cash for influence, since she figured every poor soul was just a gold digger in disguise. Sliding a shimmering band off her hand, she bragged that its value exceeded a mountain of currency. She handled me like a starving hobo who could be easily bribed with a bit of sparkly metal. With a rude gesture, the lady tossed her jewelry near my toes, demanding me to grab the loot and vanish. I remained motionless in the gloom, features obscured as her expensive trinket rattled against the tiles. My companion reached his breaking point, hollering her name with genuine resentment. He felt absolutely sickened that she would treat a visitor with such blatant disrespect within their family residence. The boy continued his vocal protest, demanding an explanation for her savage behavior. Meanwhile, I just hung back without a word, peering as though I were deeply pondering her creative insults. My pal looked toward me with a face full of regret, apologizing for her lack of manners. He clearly felt totally humiliated by his own bloodline today. I actually lowered myself to snag the jewelry, though greed had absolutely nothing to do with it. I informed the lady that my alliance with her son was based on his impressive combat future. Rising again, I looked her straight in the eye, questioning if her son's honor carried no weight in her heart. Both of them were visibly stunned by my sudden surge of backbone. The boy gazed at me with a fresh sense of admiration. Despite those nasty comments, this humble companion was fighting to protect the dignity of our newfound brotherhood. That woman was practically steaming, her expression contorted into a mask of pure fury. She shrieked for assistance to deal with this mess, but destiny was preparing a little surprise. A horde of armored dudes and servants flooded the room instantly, gesticulating wildly toward me. She commanded them to eject this disgusting peasant from the premises without further delay. He stepped in their path, yelling that my skills far exceeded his own meager abilities. He mentioned how I shattered every existing record and even clobbered Faye in a fair duel. His mom simply chuckled at those notions, labeling such stories as absurd fabrications. She stubbornly denied that a lowborn person might ever outshine the pampered children of the aristocracy. I stood my ground, asserting that having me as a partner would propel the boy to even greater heights of power. He stared in my direction, completely flabbergasted by my unexpected support. She wailed, wondering how much longer I intended to ridicule her ancestors. Her classy demeanor finally cracking. My self-assurance was being interpreted as a personal slap to her entire family tree. Her anger erupted into a scary crimson glow that saturated the surrounding area. The goons were tightening a circle around me, and it seemed like a brawl was finally inevitable. Out of nowhere, the giant entrance door swung wide with a loud bang. A formidable silhouette appeared in the corridor, causing the entire crowd to suddenly lose their voices. A guy with a thick beard and a very serious expression appeared. He echoed my previous statement to everyone present, inquiring if I really had the guts to say those things. Kane and I stayed stuck like statues, our eyes popping out of our heads, while even the lady of the house looked like she just met a poltergeist. The big boss strolled into the corridor, causing everyone to double over in respect for William Ranker, the legendary patriarch and imperial powerhouse. That sooty lady's pride evaporated instantly, leaving her drenched in cold sweat as she stuttered his name. obviously horrified of her own spouse. William ignored her completely like a bad commercial, marching toward us youngsters, while she failed to intervene before he locked his gaze on me. He advanced with a spooky level of chill, his flowing crimson cloak only heightening the massive final boss vibes he was practically using. Kane folded like a cheap lawn chair while greeting his dad with trembling words, as I struggled to look cool near such a heavy aura. I claimed to be Kane's buddy while my brain scrambled, realizing William's spiritual pressure was just as ridiculous as the headmaster's scary energy. William glared at his boy with icy, dim eyes, uttering only his name, Kane, which was basically enough to stop anyone's ticker from beating. He questioned if I was a real deal, so Kane immediately blurted out that my fighting skills totally eclipsed his, making this a pivotal moment. William's gaze sparked with a piercing azure glow from the dark, ordering us to show him, which made the room feel like gravity tripled. The Aranka clan leader summoned a giant, shimmering scarlet tiger spirit that loomed above us, its roar nearly knocking the house off its foundations. I was leaking sweat like a broken faucet, crushed by the most savage bloodlust imaginable, wondering how a person could harbor such nasty vibes. The fiery feline manifestation screamed with a wild fury that promised to shred us, showcasing a truly horrifying amount of pure, unrefined strength. William remained calm inside the chaos, his eyes burning like hot coals, while I barely stayed upright against the literal weight of his energy. I clenched my jaw, looking like a sheet of paper as I grasped the reality that this guy was just a beast wearing human skin. William's blood red stare pinned me down with murderous intent, teaching me the hard way that the Aranker boss does not play nice during practice. I was vibrating with terror when the epiphany struck. This dude was not joking and actually planned to delete my existence right this second. The Thorpe, he wants me dead, pulsed in my brain while his malice peaked, turning a fancy living room into a brutal survival zone. The giant burst of crimson and ivory light erupted as the blow landed, engulfing me completely and leaving me wondering if I was still alive. I felt dizzy from the immense force, as if my spirit was being evicted, proving the Aranka resolve was a nightmare that was currently ruining me. It finally clicked that I was facing a true master, so my own eyes burned red as I got ready to fight back against him. My surroundings transformed into a wild orange firestorm, since my long career of slaying beasts gave me enough grit to ignore his scary face. If this is all he has got, I muttered while the fires swirled, daring the family patriarch to give me his best shot with total confidence. I let my own strength explode in a giant wave of radiance and heat, making William look tiny compared to the sheer scale of my power. William Rankle looked genuinely bamboozled, whispering a confused, "What?" because he never expected a 13-year-old kid to push back with such spicy energy. The tension ramped up as a huge, shimmering ruby dragon skull formed from the mist, but I stared death in the eye without even winking. I was totally focused, sensing the crosshair design shining in my pupil while I gathered every scrap of my strength to weather this trial. The gigantic scarlet tiger pounced through the heat toward William, turning our little chat into a full-blown war between two absolute units of power. The towering column of crimson and golden radiance exploded between us, rattling the floor and likely turning the basement into a pile of rubble. Kane was yelling from the corner, looking completely horrified for my safety, knowing his father lacked a low power mode and fearing I was now dust. The energy surge finally subsided, allowing the dust to settle from the battle. William stood completely unfazed like a granite monument, even though the room around him had been reduced to rubble. Meanwhile, I found myself kneeling on the floor, gasping desperately for air and looking completely spent. William looked down at me from above, his expression cold and analytical. Kane hurried over to lift me up, asking if I was alright. I managed a weak dare, but it was obvious the skirmish had taken absolutely everything from me, and he had no idea what kind of trouble was coming next. William finally broke his silence, inquiring about the true motivation behind my pursuit of strength. His voice held no anger, which surprised me. He seemed genuinely curious about what made this scrappy kid tick. I lifted my head, my gaze still sharp and full of stubborn fire. I might have been physically beaten, but my spirit remained entirely unbroken. William shut his eyes momentarily, processing my sheer determination. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room as everyone waited for the head of the household's judgment. William turned to his son and declared his willpower far too feeble. He then ordered Kane to absorb every lesson he could from me, and Kane could only offer a small, defeated yes. The noble matriarch completely lost her temper, shouting William's name and demanding to know what he was thinking. She was clearly horrified that her husband would acknowledge a commoner like me. William simply gave her an icy side eye and inquired if she had an opinion. She immediately shriveled into a shaky no, realizing she was significantly outmatched. Kane and his mother shared a very awkward moment while William stood unyielding. The family dynamics here were clearly more complicated than a knot of snakes. Kane wisely decided to change the subject, telling me we should head straight to the training ground. I was completely on board, thrilled to escape the high society drama. We arrived at the Aranker family's personal training facility, which was essentially an entire farce clearing. Kane immediately apologized for his parents' behavior, looking genuinely embarrassed. Kane confessed that his father was a little extreme, but I simply shrugged off the comment. I told him our differences weren't significant enough to worry about social class or background. Kane thought to himself that his father was strictly a meritocrat, valuing only results, He felt that I was a far more suitable son for the Aranker family than he was. I offered a small, knowing smile, suggesting that William's constant testing of my abilities was actually his twisted way of showing affection. Kane looked at me as if I had lost my mind completely. Kane stood beneath a tree, watching leaves fall as he repeated the word, love. It was obvious he had never before considered his father's harshness in such a strange light. I could see him reflecting on his entire life through the gaze of his blue eye. He had been living under a shadow for a long time, and my words were beginning to stir something deep within him, marking just the start of his change. I saw a memory flash in his eyes. A young Kane training fiercely in the woods, looking absolutely determined as he faced off against a wild wolf. He has literally been fighting for his life since he was a small child. Young Kane swung at a monstrous creature, his face set in a mask of grit. His father's only dream was to forge him into a great sage, just like his grandfather. Kane kept swinging his sword without understanding why, simply following commands. He was being trained as a child soldier, and it appeared incredibly lonely. All he truly desired was a little bit of recognition from his father, but William always looked down on him with those cold, disappointed eyes. For Kane, the Aranker mansion felt less like a home and more like a high-end prison. Every single breath he took felt like it needed his father's official permission. While the adults surrounding him praised him as the young master, Kane felt that his high status and natural talent were nothing but heavy chains binding him. The more tightly those bonds held him, the more he yearned for the outside world. He dreamed of being a bard, singing freely and finally living life on his own terms. He pictured himself as a bird flying across the entire continent, far away from his father's massive expectations. Unfortunately, reality proved to be much less forgiving than his fantasies. Back in the present, Kane caught a falling feather, a sad smile on his face. He was finally realizing that he couldn't simply run away from his problems forever. Kane looked at his reflection in the training room window. He understood that in this world, only strength holds value. And right now, he felt far too weak to finally be truly free. I stood waiting patiently by the weapon rack, letting Kane finish his internal crisis. We were finally prepared to begin some proper, hands-on instruction. Wielding a rapier with gusto, Kane dramatically announced that only immense power could sever his invisible shackles, finally stumbling upon a true reason to throw punches. He longed for the sweet liberty of a wild stallion, just like his old man, an academy alum, had enjoyed. Now, Kane stood poised to crash the institution and make everyone's jaw drop. Kane aimed his blade directly at me, a laser focus in his gaze, clearly expecting me to be his personal power, a button, and I simply offered a self-charge. Absolutely. We squared up, our determined faces practically twin reflections of impending doom for anyone who dared cross us, signaling a collaboration destined for truly wild accomplishments. I adopted a serious combat posture, fully prepared to wring every last drop of potential from Kane. The host, let us be honest, friendship has absolutely no place in a proper beatdown. Our practice brawl began in the open field, transforming us into little more than speedy, indistinct smudges, while William, ever the dramatic observer, lurked unseen within the mansion's dark fringes. William summoned his chief sleuth to review the findings of my personal deep dive, clearly unwilling to gamble even a single cop piece on some suspiciously talented plebeian. The monocle, wearing majordomo, gave a tiny twitch, confirming I was certainly no run-of-the-mill individual, and even detailed my use of utterly bizarre, never before witnessed fighting moves during the entrance test. He further elaborated that I didn't merely shatter established benchmarks, I actually trounced Faye, a practitioner of incredibly potent sorcery. In short, I was a walking paradox, and the weirdness was only just beginning. The meticulous butler pressed on with his dossier, sporting a look of genuine fascination at his discoveries, essentially confirming I was the universe's most perplexing Rubik's Cube. He then disclosed that Principal Aronian held me in shockingly high esteem, going so far as to fend off a guild of shadowy contract killers just to keep me safe yesterday evening. Truly, the story was becoming thicker than old-fashioned molasses. William observed our training bout, making a mental note that I possessed a distinct flair for mischief. His gaze so piercing and strategic it suggested he was either inventing cold fusion or planning my entire life. The diligent butler queried why William would even allow me near Kane, given my apparent designation as a working hazard. A perfectly reasonable inquiry considering William usually cocoons his son in bubble wrap. William's guiding principle was straightforward. Rascals draw peril, and by confronting and vanquishing such threats, individuals truly flourish. Essentially, I was Kane's personal, highly combustible growth stimulant. During our practice session, I unleashed a truly monumental high kick that struck Kane's guard with the force of a small meteorite, proving I was about as forgiving as a tax order. William held the firm conviction that my mere presence could genuinely fortify Kane, essentially wagering his entire inheritance on this unpretentious fellow being the exact ignition source his progeny required. Kane swiftly regained his footing, twirling his sword to conjure a vibrant emerald cyclone of raw power, then bellowed for me to endure his special move, finally catching the true groove of our combat. I returned his challenge with a mischievous grin, urging him to unleash every ounce of his might upon me, as I was at last beginning to witness the raw talent in Kane that William had been so enthusiastically championing. William remained with his arms folded, privately conceding that his offspring possessed a superior knack for evaluating individuals compared to his own discerning eye. Which, for a man of his ego, was akin to confessing he liked socks with sandals. Cain launched himself forward, executing his signature martial arcane wind lunge, leaving a swirling emerald vortex in his wake, moving with a velocity that could easily outpace a startled cheater. My gaze ignited with an intricate targeting reticle as I braced myself for a perfect riposte, practically deciphering Cain's mystical attack as if it were a picture book for toddlers. Cain became an almost invisible streak of pure focus, rapidly narrowing the distance between us, clearly channeling every ounce of his being into this singular, bulked, worked, nothing blow. With an earth-shattering detonation, I casually deflected his entire assault using only my forearm, generating a colossal concussion wave from the impact, all without bothering to tap into a single drop of magical energy. I offered a few constructive criticisms, noting his speed was commendable, yet his motions leaned a touch too predictably straight, essentially providing a masterclass even as I thoroughly trounced him. Cain stood there, utterly dumbfounded, gasping for breath and dripping with perspiration, musing internally that despite his reliance on powerful spells, I had effortlessly nullified his offense, thus painfully acknowledging the colossal chasm between our combat methodologies. Cain finally experienced that aha moment, a wide grin spreading across his face, as he grasped why even Faye had failed against me. It wasn't about brute force, but rather impeccable, absolute technical brilliance. Catching Cain's rather intense expression, I innocently inquired if I perhaps had a rogue crumb on my cheek, completely unaware that I was rapidly transforming into his personal, larger-than-life martial arts guru. I adopted a graver demeanor, posing the weighty question to Cain about any lingering unease with his personal combat methodology, poised to unleash a torrent of profound fighting philosophy. And that, my friends, was the precise instant the narrative took a sharp left turn. Cain appeared thoroughly bewildered, giving his scalp a bewildered scratch, promptly clarifying that his unique techniques comprised the hallowed secret teachings bequeathed across countless generations of the esteemed Aranko lineage. I promptly retorted that ancestral mastery didn't automatically equate to personal optimal strategy, gently informing him that a truly unique route, entirely his own, weighted discovery, and perhaps a good map wouldn't hurt. I watched as he sketched out a ghost of William in another distant forefather, then he peered down, understanding he'd always been merely a photocopy of his dad and granddad. Back at the weapons display, my blade comfortably propped on my shoulder, I patiently observed, waiting Cain's momentous decision about his entire future. With a sly grin, I casually inquired if he might enjoy catching his father off guard, a truly irresistible offer for a young man who'd spent his entire life craving validation. Out of nowhere, two elite executioners burst from the canopy, soaring directly towards William, turning a simple practice session into a very real, and very nail-biting, assassination attempt. I meticulously deconstructed the art of fighting, making it clear that when it comes to martial prowess, sheer velocity stands as the ultimate advantage, all while brandishing a dagger like I was about to drop some serious, sharp wisdom. I continued, emphasizing that swiftness isn't merely about how rapidly your feet can move, but rather the lightning, quick reflexes and decisive actions you can muster when circumstances escalate. I highlighted that Cain's inherent swiftness already ranked among the best, and when combined with his potent wind attribute sorcery, he could genuinely become an indistinguishable blur on any battlefield. Cain appeared genuinely taken aback by my assessment, especially as I revealed a sword breathed in vibrant emerald wind energy, illustrating that the whole trick was synchronizing magic with motion. I made it clear to Cain that his grandfather's mastery of the family's secret arts didn't mean they were the only path forward for him, suspecting his own father might have hit a formidable plateau because he simply never grasped this crucial concept. To truly unlock his full potential, I proposed Cain should pivot towards a highly specialized combat methodology, then frankly asked if he was mentally prepared to overhaul every single thing he knew. I fluidly transitioned into a dual dagger posture, exuding an undeniable aura of precision, challenging him to shed the image of a privileged nobleman and finally embrace the identity of an authentic combatant. Cain clutched his dagger tightly, his face set with unwavering determination, declaring he would absolutely commit to anything that promised eventual liberation from his father's overbearing influence. I acknowledged his excellent response and seamlessly continued the instruction, clarifying that the essence of this particular combat style revolved around ceaseless motion and perfectly timed retreats to orchestrate subsequent offensives. A shared, confident smirk spread across our faces, eager to translate our theoretical discussions into practical application, and as I remarked, "Let us reveal your father's true capabilities." I knew excitement was about to reach fever pitch. The training skirmish began, rocketing from zero to maximum intensity in an instant, as two professional assailants sprang from the foliage at William. Yet he simply remained rooted, firm as a granite peak. Cain and I launched our own precisely orchestrated offensive, leaping into the chaotic confrontation together, bellowing accelerate, channeling potent wind magic to turbocharge our initial maneuver. A colossal streak of shimmering teal energy sliced across the practice area. As we zipped along so quickly, it seemed we were practically teleporting towards the esteemed patriarch of the Aranko lineage. William responded in a flash, his cloak rippling dramatically as he parried a blow from one of the masked guardians, making it clear that catching him unaware was a nearly impossible feat. Though things were certainly about to become more complicated, Kane propelled himself forward with a dagger, his weapon radiating wind energy as he attempted to breach his farthest formidable defenses, exhibiting more ferocity now than during his entire entrance examination. We touched down and instantly glided into our next combat positions with a crisp, audible swish, our synchronized movements becoming rather unnerving for a mere pair of energetic adolescents. I carefully outlined the reasoning behind this strategic modification. Daggers are undeniably the swiftest and most agile weaponry available, making them absolutely ideal for someone blessed with Kane's exceptional speed metrics. I informed him that we needed to exploit every single one of our advantages to their ultimate degree, all while I wore an intense, concentrated expression that silently broadcasted I was simultaneously crunching about 100 different tactical possibilities. I utilized my signature martial arts butterfly step, transforming into a mesmerizing blur encircled by luminous, ethereal butterflies, deftly weaving around William's visual field. William actually emitted a low sound of intrigue as he observed my complex footwork, and while it takes an awful lot to impress that particular gentleman, my sheer technical mastery was clearly doing the trick. I generated multiple phantom images around William, meticulously aiming for the highest possible offensive impact within the most confined area, an utterly overwhelming demonstration of pure, unadulterated swiftness. Kane harnessed his wind magic to catapult into an airborne assault from above, clearly taking my coaching to heart and maintaining a relentless, dynamic movement pattern. The combined onslaught of my deceptive ground, level feints and Kane's audacious diving attack cornered William in a classic pincer maneuver, meaning we were actually managing to make a grandmaster break a sweat. Kane was totally immersed in the moment, reflecting on the astonishing lightness he felt, a profound realization that this brand new fighting philosophy suited him absolutely perfectly. He envisioned himself as a majestic bird gracefully soaring through the expansive heavens, finally liberated from the cumbersome restraints that had tethered him, confirming this wasn't just a battle for him, but a monumental personal breakthrough. Kane successfully landed a clean strike, his personal aura radiating a brilliant emerald hue, having brilliantly fused his intricate dagger techniques, specialized combat training, and potent wind magic into one fluid, cohesive style. That neon butter knife looked impressive, showing the kid finally ditched his father's boring life goals to forge a path that was actually cool. The patriarch gawked at his offspring, his grumpy face shaded while one eyeball beamed a neon violet hue at an impossible evolution. The grumpy man grumbled nonsense as his poker face shattered, realizing his boy had the scary potential to eventually surpass him and that this was merely the start. Kane hollowed about his fancy new fighting style while diving forward, leaving a minty fresh-like trail as he finally entered the zone. Pops gave a chilly snort, acting like he wasn't too impressed while preparing to show everyone why he remains the undisputed boss of this clan. Big Willie unleashed a gargantuan crimson fart, tossing the boy across the scenery and proving our current power level was absolutely pathetic. Draped in spooky shadows, the man wondered if his son would ditch the family's secret source just for some rebellion. Looking like a boss, our duo wasn't ready for a nap yet, so I yelled for more speed as we leaped headfirst back into the swirling magical chaos. The boy looked focused, his azure eyes beaming as he promised to follow my weird plans until the bitter, likely painful end. Using some breezy spells, Kane pushed the gas pedal, making the atmosphere go crazy while he set up his next big flashy attack. We zipped apart like circus performers, leaving neon streaks behind us while hunting for a sneaky spot where the old man was not currently looking. The guy just hung out, wearing a bored expression that suggested he'd seen these shenanigans a million times before we even existed. We jumped him from two sides, Kane's knives turning into a verdant blender as he searched for a hole in his dad's thick defense. Papar's eye turned a scary shade of crimson while he scanned us, picking apart our mistakes like a grumpy high school teacher during finals. The youngster tried his best, but the old man stared him down while grabbing the blade with a glowy hand, asking if that pathetic wiggle was truly his peak and delivering a massive ego check. A loud boom rattled our teeth when William grabbed the sword, the vibrating air proving that we were basically toddlers fighting a literal tank. The patriarch pushed back with smoky shatters, making the poor kid shake like a leaf as he tried not to drop his pointy toys. Dad looked grossed out, calling his kid a coward for backing off, failing to see that we were actually being clever for once. The patriarch refused to let up, sprinting forward with a scary crimson glow that promised an immediate end to this lopsided training session. I gave some telepathic coaching, explaining that running away is just advanced positioning to help him wind up a much harder, more painful wallop. The boy planted his heels, breezy magic exploding as he prepared to flip the script, leaving the old man clueless about the impending and very heavy smackdown. Skating across the mud, the boy acted like a scaredy cat just to lure his dad into our super secret ultimate combo move of doom. The kid summoned a giant emerald hurricane, making the Lorne look like a blender, which was pretty impressive for someone who still has chaws. We sprinted through the storm, hiding behind the breeze to sneak up on the old man like ninjas on a massive caffeine high. Pops ground his pearly whites together while the wind tickled his face, finally having to block for once in his miserable life. We screamed like crazy people while throwing our last big punch, knowing it was either victory or a very long hospital stay. I mentioned a weird sports move from my old world, and though the kid looked baffled, he agreed to trust my crazy brain anyway. I exploited my previous life memories to swing with a weird rhythm, confusing the old man and proving that being reincarnated is basically cheating, leaning into the strike with everything I had. My eyes flared blue, showing I definitely wasn't playing nice with the head of the house. The boy attacked with a series of quick stabs, his blades clanging against the man's guard like a drummer who had way too much coffee today. The impact created a torrential spray of sparks. We were seriously standing our ground against a legendary grandmaster, a fact which truly defied all logical thinking. Mentally, I noted the method uses tempo changes to thoroughly bamboozle rival fighters. This transforms even mundane gestures into incredible deceptions that nobody can possibly decode. I flashed a smug smile, understanding that even a microsecond of hesitation from your adversary, during a top-tier skirmish, grants you the necessary opportunity. Kane zipped past, resembling a phantom, the swiftness shattering William's defenses by utilizing his true assets. He was finally performing according to his chosen playbook. William observed our antics, his facial features twisting into a complicated knot of surprise. He began to grasp the unconventional potential I had been enthusiastically describing. Kane lunged forward aiming for another hit, appearing far more like a highly paid hitman than the son of an aristocrat. We had completely adopted this strange fighting method. William mused privately, deeming such a sluggish blow utterly pointless. Easily preparing his counterattack, he continued to severely underestimate the devastating impact of the tempo shift. I noticed the moment of absolute enlightenment flash in William's gaze as the blow suddenly accelerated halfway through its trajectory. The dreadful understanding arrived about 1 second behind schedule, accompanied by a deafening clang. All three individuals slammed into a monumental explosion of force. Kane and I successfully bypassed his initial layer of protection. I executed a perfect aerial flip directly over William, traversing the intervening space effortlessly. I was basically Narder Komain-sai but armed with a frighteningly sharp blade. We bellowed simultaneously, channeling the entirety of our remaining vigor into a single, utterly crucial lunge, and precisely at that instant, the situation radically transformed. A tremendous, prostrate pulse of kinetic energy burst forth the moment our weapons interlocked. It was a solid connection that illuminated the whole wooded glade like a cheap flashbulb. All motion abruptly ceased, time essentially hitting pause. William simply grabbed both of our offensive tools and quietly announced, "This is sufficient." This tone carried undeniable, supreme dominion. Kane and I became statues, our respiration ragged and loud as we gawked at the guy who had just effortlessly neutralized our finest maneuver. William remained motionless, arms folded, this fabulous cloak fluttering dramatically, appearing exactly like the mythical figure we know. He represents the pinnacle of sheer might across this whole planet. Kane anxiously looked towards his paternal figure, perspiration pouring from his brow and cheeks. He was simultaneously terrified yet optimistic, anticipating confirmation that he finally measured up. William commanded him to refrain from staining the reputation of the illustrious Aranka clan. While his phrasing sounded extremely severe, coming from William, it qualified as glowing praise. Kane shouted an enormous, "Brayful, understood?" The par, his fluffy little down feathers spiraled in the breeze around them. He had finally received the validation he had desperately desired for ages. William began marching off, his personal attendant trailing faithfully in his wake. He was completely finished with the mushy feelings and immediately resumed his role as the unflappable noble master. William contemplated the skirmish, pondering the relentless rapid assaults and the previously concealed strategies we employed. He was honestly wasting his time scrutinizing a duel involving a pair of teenagers. He verbally labeled the concept of controlled withdrawal fascinating. Understanding this was a combat dimension he previously ignored, I successfully managed to educate a literal legend about advanced strategy. William thought quietly, imagining the indignity of gleaning wisdom from mere youngsters. He was implicitly confessing that I possessed absolutely terrifying genius regarding battle methodologies. I exhaled deeply, steadily regaining my composure as the chemical rush of excitement vanished. I felt profound relief that the sparring session concluded without any unexpected fatalities. Kane was ridiculously ecstatic, seizing my arm and bellowing that he felt properly validated for the first time ever in his existence. He was so intensely excited that he demanded to bestow our gift immediately. We strolled inside the enormous Aranka household repository. It featured monstrous shelving structures that climbed several floor levels. For an academic obsessive like me, this was pure, tangible utopia. I was utterly astonished, yelling about the endless volume count, my eyes sparkling like a kid in a candy store. The spectacle generated significantly more enthusiasm than nearly surviving a sword duel. Kane presented me with a weighty container, declaring it was a token of deep gratitude. He confessed that without my interference, discovering his true direction would have taken ages. I appeared moderately shocked, my expression freezing into a momentary mask of confusion. Receiving this level of appreciation from someone so aristocratic was unexpected, but destiny plays dirty. I flipped open the package and my mouth fell somewhere near the floor. It contained sparkling yellow currency and genuinely scarce artifacts. I screamed in disbelief, questioning the immense worth, my peasant sensibilities having an absolute meltdown. Kane clarified that these volumes were strictly academic texts, but also confidential discovery tomes regarding sorcery that the general public rarely views. He was essentially providing me with an outrageously unfair advantage in life. I quickly skimmed through the textbooks, spotting titles like Fundamental Arcana Principles and the Mechanics of Manhwa Attributes. I learned that new students are separated in either magical arts or physical combat tracks, and everyone must complete a ritual for awakening their powers. When I asked about this ritual, Kane explained that it's the process where you finally learn to sense the elements near the magnificent statue of Gyre. He mentioned completing his own church temple, but even for a member of a prominent family, it cost an astronomical 10 gold coins. The sum, he emphasized, was basically a king's ransom for any normal person. After calculating the costs, I realized 100 gold coins could feed the orphanage for several years. I nervously asked if I would also be required to pay that high fee upon entering the academy. Kane quickly reassured me that once admitted to the academy, the ritual was completely free of charge. It was a huge relief for me and provided yet another reason why gaining entrance here was absolutely vital. I immediately envisioned the academy surrounded by floating, shimmering gold coins. The perks of being a top-tier student were seriously on a completely different level. Kane brought up the agreement we had made during the entrance exam, wanting to confirm that I accepted the gift without any reservations. He added with a friendly smile that I should feel free to lean on him if I ever found myself in trouble. Realizing how much wealth magical pharmacists earned, I decided to immediately start searching for relevant books in the library. I was already in the process of planning out my future commercial empire. Suddenly, the brilliant light bulb went off above my head. I realized that if I began inventing items using my previous life's knowledge, I could make money extremely quickly. I was poised to single-handedly revolutionize the world economy. I adopted a serious expression and asked Kane if the Aranker family had any connections with merchant associations. Kane was clearly completely bewildered by my sudden, corporate-minded inquiry. I gave him a knowing wink and pressed a finger to my lips, explaining that it was a secret he would figure out eventually. I decided I was officially the most dangerous person in the room, truly a legendary mastermind. 1 week later, the day of the Kandrir Arcanist Academy entrance ceremony finally arrived. The grand hall buzzed with all the new students who had somehow managed to survive the brutal entrance tests. I strolled into the courtyard looking remarkably sharp in my brand new school uniform. I realized I was giving off powerful main character energy without even trying to impress anyone. Suddenly, the pink-haired girl named Rose invaded my personal space, getting way too close and taking a deep sniff of me. She complimented my trendy new cologne, which felt like an extremely odd way to introduce herself to a freshman. Rose quickly deduced from the price of the scent that my parents must have incredibly deep pockets. She was essentially attempting to assess my entire social position based purely on how I smelled. Rose led the way, though she confessed she'd never heard the name Kyriel before. She then boldly speculated that I might be some noble-s legitimate love child, which was an incredibly presumptuous thing to announce to a stranger. As we navigated the giant corridors, Rose began sharing some important backstory on current events. She mentioned that for the last 2 years, tensions had been rising dramatically ever since the Emperor started showing signs of age. With the resulting power vacuum, the various imperial heirs have been openly battling the major noble houses right here at the academy. It turns out this isn't just a learning institution. It's a dangerous political arena. She credited Principal Aronian for maintaining peace on the surface, but assured me that underneath, everything was a complete mess. The entire academy, according to her, was a powder keg just waiting for someone to drop a match. Rose then proceeded to explain the harsh realities of life here. Average students can progress by passing classes and collecting credits. However, if you become a target and crash and burn, you are instantly expelled, with absolutely 0 second chances. Pointing her finger directly at me, she announced that I was officially one of the new students everyone would be watching closely. I essentially had a massive target painted on my back from my very first day. Rose leaned in close, giving me a clear warning that I had already become a person of interest to the entire student body. She immediately started prying into my private affairs, nonchalantly asking which side my family supported in the looming political conflict. She practically pressed her face against mine, whispering the question about my family's allegiance directly into my ear. I could feel myself starting to sweat under the pressure of this impromptu interrogation. The answer I gave, I realized, to completely alter my future here. Just then, behind suddenly appeared, cutting Rose off in the middle of her interrogation. A new student with spiky blonde hair walked up to us, apparently recognizing me as the lowborn freshman everyone was gossiping about. This was Brian, who seemed significantly more relaxed than every other noble I had encountered. He offered me a handshake, congratulating me on absolutely shattering the entrance exam records while the background crowd continued to whisper about my lowborn status. Rose seemed completely thrown off by the interruption, still rambling about the expensive fragrance she'd noticed earlier. She had clearly lost control of the social interaction and was completely unsure how to regain the upper hand now that Brian had joined us. Concluding I wasn't worth the trouble, Rose stormed off in a huff, grumbling that the whole encounter had been a total waste of her valuable time. I chose to disregard her attitude, remaining polite as I told Brian it was a pleasure to meet him, effectively launching our new partnership. I offered a small nod of greeting to the new guy, confirming our introduction. I am always polite. After all, even in a viper's nest like this place. I continued conversing with Brian, the guy with short blonde hair who actually seemed decent compared to the other students. He told me to simply ignore Rose's charmer and not take her attitude too seriously. Brian's handshake was firm as he delivered a stark warning. The academy itself functions as a smaller, more concentrated version of the entire empire. As a commoner, he assured me things would be unnecessarily challenging. At that very moment, Kane came sprinting up, yelling out my name. It seemed our friendship remained intact despite all the intense family drama back at the mansion. Brian waved us away, mentioning he had to introduce himself to the other incoming students. He told me to reach out if I ever needed anything, instantly solidifying himself as a potential asset. I watched Brian depart, quietly assessing the situation. My mind was already in strategic mode, analyzing every person I met to discern genuine intentions from pure opportunism. Brian disappeared into the milling crowd of students. He appeared to be a genuinely decent individual, yet in an institution like this, one could never be entirely certain about anyone's motives. Kane caught up to me and immediately demanded to know what I was discussing with Brian. Clearly surprised I was acquainted with the Chancellor's son, Kane confirmed that Brian was indeed the Chancellor's son, but quickly added that they weren't particularly close. He spoke about Brian with a familiar, underlying noble rivalry I was learning to recognize. Kane admitted Brian wasn't a bad person, at least when compared to some of the truly spoiled and arrogant snobs we had already encountered during our time here. However, Kane then added that he despised weak, old individuals like Brian. Just as he finished the thought, Faye and Miliarna approached, and Faye's expression instantly turned offended by the comment. Faye shouted that Kane's job about being weak, willed was an obvious insult directed at her as well. Miliarna merely offered a cheerful greeting while the other two resumed their familiar squabble. Yet things were about to escalate significantly. I made sure to thank Faye once again for her crucial assistance during the entrance examination. Faye brushed it off, stating I passed on my own merits and owed her no gratitude whatsoever. Faye clenched her fist, a fiery determination glowing in her eyes as she vowed to be the victor next time. She was clearly still smarting from her defeat in the forest. Kane promptly began mocking her, calling her a weakling, which predictably made her even angrier. These two were already establishing themselves as the group's resident bickering couple. Miliarna intervened, grabbing Faye and physically pulling her away, claiming they needed to finish their official registration. She acted as the pragmatic anchor, ensuring the group remained focused on the schedule. Once we were finally alone, Kane handed me a surprisingly heavy sack of gold coins. He explained this was my share, and for a commoner, it felt like a truly life-altering amount of wealth. I saw a fleeting image of the Burner Village Trading Company, confirming that my secret business project from my previous life was already generating substantial profits. I revealed my secret product, perfume. I had developed a new type with a subtle, refined scent that distinguished it significantly from the coarse, common fragrances most people used. Kane took a curious sniff, acknowledging it smelled pleasant, but questioned whether it would actually earn money. I gave him a confident response, assuring him he would soon find out when he started selling it. Kane was astonished that we managed to get such a high price for what seemed like a simple scent. He immediately planned to give some to his mother, while my mind was already plotting the next big business idea. As we worked through the reception hall together, we agreed to keep the entire business venture completely confidential. Kane was already thoroughly impressed and satisfied with how easily he was making a significant profit. A faculty member presented me with my official school credit card. He urged me to dedicate myself fully and achieve mastery as quickly as possible to fulfill my full potential. Other students nearby were whispering that I was shameless for being accepted here. The rumors about the principal expelling Sheath specifically for my sake had clearly spread, turning them hostile. Kane explained that Sheath was expelled on the spot after it was discovered he hired an assassin's guild. Apparently, the academy actually draws the line at attempted murder. I remained silent as I processed the information, realizing my initial suspicion about the attack in the woods was accurate. It truly had been a targeted assassination attempt by a spiteful, have-one loser. Kane cautioned me that Sheath's older brother, Jess, was still a student here. He told me to stay close to him, as there was no telling what kind of revenge Jess might seek. As if on cue, Jess emerged from the shadows, watching us with a murderous glare. He clearly wasn't going to let his brother's expulsion go unpunished, though they had no idea what was actually coming next. Jess curled his lips into a sinister smirk, muttering under his breath that the real entertainment had just begun. This character appeared far more dangerous and calculating than his younger sibling ever was. The scene shifted to the magnificent grand hall for the official opening ceremony. Principal Smith stood before the assembled crowd, formally welcoming the new students to the Kandria Arcanist Academy. Smith instructed the students to take pride in having navigated such difficult trials to gain entrance here. He was delivering the quintessential elite speech intended to pump everyone up for the start of the semester. He urged everyone to keep hitting those books hard, hoping to mature into truly formidable cornerstones of the empire, while the new students absorbed this with a jumble of excitement and jitters. Smith fellow then brought forth the next presenter, the representative for the new batch, a fellow named Neil Gunn, and the room's energy instantly shifted the moment the top scholar was summoned. A set of completely unadorned feet ascended the steps onto the platform, making a solid thud. Truly this chap couldn't even bother with footwear for his big introductory speech. And Neil Gunn stood aloft, bare-chested, balancing his colossal mallet upon his shoulder, looking far more like someone freshly escaped from a very dusty arena than a formal orientation guest. The snooty, aristocratic pupils were certainly engaging in intense behind their hand chatter regarding the rough commoner who snagged the leading rank, his emanating hostility practically humming in the atmosphere. The supervising faculty members were flapping about, labeling him a complete nincompoop. Yet Principal Smith just watched with a thoroughly delighted expression, clearly relishing this spectacular breach of etiquette. Neil promptly roared his massive tool crashing down, loudly demanding silence from the assembled simpletons, making it perfectly clear he was not here today to make any new pals. He proclaimed his sole ambition was to utterly crush every last one of them until they were completely waterlogged with fear, truly setting the benchmark for the most dreadful introductory address ever heard. The student body erupted in fury, reciprocating with rude gestures and loud condemnations that snagging first place did not grant him license to behave like some sort of brute. But Neil just met their gaze with total lack of sympathy. Neil bellowed at them to simply cease their noise, branding them all soft torkers lacking real grit, effectively challenging the entire incoming class to step up all at once. One poor soul was actually clutching his middle, weakly stating he felt an immediate need to withdraw from studies, while Smith stood behind the problematic youth, peering entirely unconcerned by the unfolding mayhem. Neil dramatically aimed his gargantuan implement straight at a specific individual in the audience, bellowing that this person represented his primary objective, having clearly zeroed in on a particular mark. With a truly massive heave, he launched his enormous striking implement skyward, the heavy metal head whipping through the air toward the spectators with a significant whoosh, and that's when the game completely changed direction. The hammer impacted the flooring directly ahead of my position with a noise that suggested several bones had just been pulverized. Neil wasn't merely engaging in empty, boastful rhetoric, he was immediately putting his pronouncements into forceful action. The weapon embedded itself deeply into the polished stone, wisps of heat shimmering off the metal, serving as an unmistakable signal that hostilities had officially commenced against me. My comrade Kane and I remained standing directly before the embedded weapon, looking remarkably unperturbed, as I merely let out a weary sigh, understanding that my hoped for tranquil university tenure was now decidedly cancelled. I fixed my gaze upon Neil with a chillingly steady look, feeling no trepidation toward the towering figure or his weapon, which was precisely why I had been singled out as the primary focus. Neil gracefully alighted atop the very end of his hammer-S shaft, managing perfect equilibrium on his bare feet, peering down at me with a gleeful, predatory smirk twitching at his lips. Neil began to address them, dominating the space from his makeshift high ground, effectively transforming the welcoming ceremony into his own personal, impromptu wrestling ring. They let out a mighty yell that a fight was imminent, his eyes blazing with an almost deranged competitive fervor, while I simply returned a hard glare, prepared for anything that this fiery, paired titan decided to unleash.